Yes. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. This is the November 9th, 2023 Planning Commission hearing, and I will call the hearing to order now at 1:05 p.m. Ms. Johnson, can we please have roll call?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll proceed with roll call. No.
We had a problem on Tuesday.
Testing? I didn't think so. Yeah. Can you test yours just to see if it's on the same?
Test.
Oh, hello.
Test. Oh,
Hello? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to start again. So welcome to the November 9th, 2023 Planning Commission hearing. I will now call the hearing to order at 1:07 p.m. Ms. Johnson, can we please have roll call?
thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll proceed with roll call. Chair Bonderson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bauke,
Yes.
Commissioner Boss,
Present.
Commissioner DeLucia,
Here.
Commissioner Lodge,
Here.
Commissioner Wardlow is absent, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And with that, let's move on to our preliminary matters. Number 2A, requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements of ex-agenda items. Ms. DeBusk, do we have any?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. We have none.
And do we have any announcements or appeals?
Just one announcement. I wanted to let you know that on Tuesday, the City Council voted to eliminate the AUD expiration date, so they introduced that ordinance, which is consistent with the Planning Commission's recommendation, so just wanted to let you know that happened, and it will be on the December 5th agenda for adoption.
Wonderful news. Thank you for that announcement. And we do not have any minutes and Planning Commission resolutions to review and consider this week, so we can move directly into item 2D, which is public comment. Ms. Johnson, do we have any in-person or remote public commenters who would like to give comment on items pertaining, I should say that differently, on items not on today's agenda?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. If there's anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on general business, so again, items not on today's agenda, you can fill out a speaker slip at the back of the room. I'm not seeing any movement, so I'll go ahead and move to virtual public comment. If you'd wish to speak on Zoom at this time, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. I'm not seeing any hands raised, and we also did not receive any written correspondence, so I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Bonderson.
Very good. Thank you so much. So with that, we'll close general public comment, and we will move forward with a continued item that's on our agenda as item number 3, discussion from October 12, 2023, continued to today's hearing, and it will be in regard to the AUD progress report. We have Ms. DeBusk from the city here to give the staff presentation, if there is an additional staff presentation. So the floor is yours. Please go ahead and use your time as you need.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. We will pull up the PowerPoint. I don't really have a presentation, just to reiterate that we're here to continue the discussion that we started on October 12th. At that meeting, we highlighted data that was in the AUD report, and we provided you with some staff takeaways. The Planning Commission asked questions and also provided some feedback. We also got public comments. But today we're here to continue that Planning Commission feedback, and specifically to focus on feedback related to the questions that we had posed in the document, which we called changes to consider. And so basically we'd like to go through each chapter of the document, so about the program, about the projects, about the units, and about the process. And so for each chapter, we'll have each planning commissioner answer the 3 questions that were posed. And then once we've gone through all the commissioners, we'll move on to the next chapter. So if that makes sense.
And just to be clear, I'm going to kind of repeat what you said. So you're going to put a slide up with I think there's 3 questions per slide, and we're going to go all 6 commissioners, and then when you're done, we'll check in with you if you need anything else, and we'll move on to the next. Correct?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
So actually, we do have public comment for this item, so I think because this isn't truly a presentation, this is just showing you the slides, I think now would be the appropriate time for public comment.
Perfect. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I do have one request to speak from Ben Romo, so if you can make your way up to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, members of the commission. Chair Bonderson, thank you for allowing me a couple minutes to chat or share some input. I don't mean to be chatty today. I support the continuance of the AUD program, and I think that it's great that the city's looking at changes, ways it can be improved, and commend you on that work. I work with the owner of 821 State, or the previous owner of 821 State, where we did a commercial to residential conversion, and it was worked with the city, which was wonderful in that process. And then the owner of that building donated the building to the Housing Authority. So we have a little bit of experience downtown, and that's really what I wanted to speak to in relation to the AUD. I think the density, the increased density that the AUD allows for residential development is great. I know there's a lot of conversation around the inclusionary requirements. I can only speak to our experience downtown, and our experience downtown tells us that an inclusionary requirement for commercial conversions downtown simply won't work. We are looking at another conversion. We've actually submitted a preliminary application. I'm not sure if that's exactly the way to put it because I'm not a developer, but we submitted for, it's a building that's 5,300 square feet on each floor of a 2-story building. It's on East Carrillo. We looked at doing a bonus density project there, which would have gotten us to 16 units, which we think is the maximum we can do in that building. And it was a money loser. And this is a very philanthropic developer. This is a developer that doesn't prioritize profit. Literally donated a building to the Housing Authority after it was permitted, and they are opening it next month and making all the units affordable. The converting downtown commercial building to residential is extremely costly. There are only I don't want to say a few, but there's not abundance of buildings where it's possible. Number one. But the inclusionary requirement, if there's an inclusionary requirement, makes it very difficult. If we were prioritizing profit on this project, we would do a hotel, hands down. And as a result of not being able to utilize our bonus density, because it would make the project a money loser, we're only doing 8 units. The property is zoned for 9. So you're missing out on 7 units because we don't have the ability, we don't have the density, even with AUD. So 2 points. AUD is not dense enough downtown if you're looking for commercial conversions to residential. Number 2, if you throw inclusionary requirements on top of those commercial conversions downtown, you won't see many conversions coming along because the margins are so thin. We're not a typical developer. I know you deal with a lot of developers and I know there's this perception that developers are making a boatload of cash off of their developments. It's not true. The costs are through the roof. The risks are extremely high. If you really want to profit, you go with a hotel. So I ask that the city move forward with an adaptive reuse policy, which I know this commission has considered in the past, that would really incentivize with unlimited density and no inclusionary requirements for commercial conversions downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, and don't go anywhere yet. I'm going to
Okay.
check with one of my colleagues. Commissioner Wiscombe, do you have a question?
Yes,
comment?
thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question. Thank you for speaking on this. My question is, you're talking about inclusionary doesn't work in terms of physical units. Would it be possible that inclusionary might work with in lieu fees instead of actual physical units?
Well, on the project that I mentioned, the new project that we're pursuing, we are choosing to do the in lieu fee. It really does make sense to do that from a cost perspective, but more from a simplicity perspective. It's difficult for a for-profit developer to own and maintain a building with just one affordable unit, and then the Housing Authority is so fantastic at leveraging other dollars. So they can use the funding that we're pitching in toward affordable housing so much better than we can as a private property owner, because they can go get tax credits and financing that is government subsidized, and they're more competitive when they have the city pitching in those in lieu fees that we're paying. So it's both from our business perspective on that project of making it operationally more efficient, that we're choosing to pay the in lieu fee. I'm not expert enough to answer your question about, in this project, I think what we would have been required if either to pay the in lieu fee or do one affordable unit, but we weren't getting any additional density out of that. And that's the point. We need the additional density, and we have to pay that just to do the 8 units that we're proposing to do, I should say. And I think the challenge is, or the unfortunate outcome is, that we didn't do 16. We're only doing it on the upstairs. And again, if we were really driving for maximum profit, we would do a hotel hands down. No
Okay.
question about it.
Thank you for your answer to that. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Of course, and thank you for your question. I think that was really appropriate for all of us to hear the answer to. Ms. Johnson, do we have any other public commenters here today?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I did receive one more speaker slip from Diane Black, so if you can make your way up to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. My name's Diane Black. I'm speaking on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Santa Barbara, and I trust you got our letter. So our letter is broken into 2 pieces. One is the report, which we are very grateful that the staff did. It's the first time I've seen anything as comprehensive as that, although we had some comments about it and concerns about it, and really hope that you provide some direction to staff to revise the report, because it will remain a record of the city of Santa Barbara, and I think there are some things that need to be corrected or adjusted. But I'm not going to belabor that. I'll just give you my input on, or the organization's input on, recommended ordinance changes. So we do believe that the AUD program should be retooled to encourage development of more deed-restricted affordable housing. I know that can't happen everywhere. I know there's considerations that Ben Romo raised about adaptive reuse, and I understand the reality. But there's another reality, and that is we have to produce 8,001 units, the vast majority of which are in the affordable income categories, and it's got to happen somewhere. And if it doesn't happen through this AUD program, I don't know where it's going to happen. And so we really ask that you look for ways to get more deed-restricted affordable housing. We think you need to address the community benefit designation and its attendant benefits, that shouldn't be available for market rate. I think the city council said that time and time again, and it still hasn't been changed. We need to change the policies of the city to allow 100% affordable housing projects to be processed with reduced or eliminated processing fees. Same with increasing flexibility on building codes and enhanced permit streamlining for those projects. Everything can't be a priority. We really have to stand behind what's a priority for the city of Santa Barbara. And when it comes to housing, I think affordable housing has got to be the priority. We produced enough market rate to meet our fifth cycle RHNA. We didn't produce enough in any other category. We also think the AUD program should be restructured so that it encourages a mix of unit types, not just rental, not just small units, but for sale units and units that are available to families. We believe that every unit created through the AUD program should be given priority to local residents and workers. Otherwise, what are we doing this for? And there's ways to do it. Your city attorney has said there's ways to do it if you make the net broad enough, and South Coast seems to be broad enough. We also think that the AUD program needs to be coupled with the, can I just?
Yeah, go
finish?
ahead and finish your thought.
Coupled with identification of city-owned and other publicly owned sites, so that the Housing Authority and other nonprofits can come in and actually produce higher levels of affordable housing. And then I had a comment on adaptive reuse, but I think Ben kind of hit it. I don't think it matters how many units you put in an existing building. We should let them max it out and get as much as we can. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Black. Appreciate you being here. Do we have any other public commenters, Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I haven't received any other speaker slips, so I'm going to go ahead and move to virtual public comment. If you wish to speak on Zoom at this time, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. I'm not seeing any hands raised, but we did receive written correspondence from the Allied Neighborhoods Association, John Campanella, and the League of Women's Voters of Santa Barbara, which was distributed to the commission prior to the meeting. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Bonderson.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. So, as we all know, Ms. DeBusk is going to be leading us slide by slide today, and I will trust that you, Ms. DeBusk, will kind of keep us focused on what you need and kind of introduce what you're asking us to do on each slide, other than the obvious that we need to do our best to respond to each question. I am also aware that some of the commissioners may be responding in bulk, possibly answering all three questions kind of together as a narrative. And so, Ms. Johnson, I'm going to urge you that if you need any definition or division of thought for your note-taking, that you'll just interrupt and ask us, please. Okay, we want to make sure that you're taken care of because you have a big job today. Okay, so Ms. DeBusk, go ahead and lead us.
Great, thank you. So the first chapter we want to get your feedback on is about the program. So the three questions are, how should the three key objectives guiding the AUD program be refocused to address current housing needs and goals? Number two, should the AUD program do more to increase the rate of housing production? And three, should the AUD program continue as a trial program or should it transition to a permanent housing program? So you did answer that last week, or October 12th, and then City Council has since agreed, so I actually don't think we need to focus on that one at all.
So in other words, we're going to answer 1 and 2 today, and I just wanted to make sure that it's clear for ourselves and anyone in the room. Ms. DeBusk, will we be able to be asking questions along with our responses to any of these, if there's information we may require?
Sure, absolutely. This can be more of a free-flowing discussion. If there are questions as part of your responses, then absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you for setting the stage for us. So let me open up this comment period to my colleagues. Would anyone like to go first? Don't be shy. Thank you, in perfect form. Commissioner Wiscombe, please. Happy to have you go first.
You kind of just urged me on.
Somebody has to break the ice. Thank
okay.
you for taking it on.
So can I answer the first two questions together? I think it's better because they kind of meld together. So how should the three key objectives, encourage smaller units, locate close to transit, 3, encourage workforce housing, guiding the AUD program, be refocused to address current housing needs and goals? First of all, we need to add more flexibility by increasing the number of dwelling units per acre and decreasing the average maximum unit size. So I think developers need more flexibility. The second objective, locate close to transit, is fine, but I think partnering with MTD and other public transportation means to ensure a solid and broad public transportation system is in order. They should really, I think our public transportation systems and also our city parking lots, where we have a lot of empty spaces and we've had them since COVID. We need to find creative ways to utilize our parking lots, perhaps for parking, since we have little parking restrictions in the priority overlay, and also with the train coming, possibly coming on board, there's good ways for us to partner and maybe spread out the density a little bit. And then there were a lot of comments about the term workforce in terms of workforce housing, and that it was offensive in terms of terminology. So I don't know if we would call it middle income, or we need to have a category that's defined that's really separates moderate from a little bit higher bracket. So, or includes a little bit higher bracket too. So whatever terminology that turns out to be, I think we need to do that, because that can help, I think that category can help developers offset the very low, and moderate inclusionary that they must provide by utilizing that middle income category. And then should the AUD program do more to increase the rate of housing production? Absolutely, it should. I think it needs to be more flexible for private developers. On page 25, and this is the page in the progress report, not the page in our packet, it states that 65% of AUD projects are fewer than 10 units. So I think we need to have a means and the tools to incentivize affordability in these smaller projects. I don't know how we get there, but that's a significant number. If they're 10 units or less, how do we do that, and how do we make them work for those kind of developers and work on that while getting affordable housing? And I'm skipping around here, but we need to change to one parking space for the 3-bedroom units. And again, I'll just reiterate, partnering with our downtown parking program would certainly help. I know we did a limited amount of annual passes for private citizens to park in our garages. I think it was 100 was where we started, but we could do more on that, and we could advertise better for that. We definitely need, page 24 had the example of rounding up on density calculations. And stated that we could have had 100 more units. We definitely need to round up on density calculations. Implement flexibility in inclusionary housing by allowing increased in lieu fees instead of deed-restricted units. I think this is a must. I think it's really important. Rob Fredericks talked about it in his letter. First of all, we need to analyze and increase the in lieu fees because we haven't done that in many years. They're really pretty low. But by doing that and then allowing any developer the flexibility of giving us in lieu fees as opposed to building a deed-restricted unit, I think will help us. I think there's probably, I don't know this for sure, but I imagine there's some uncertainty in the private development community about state law and where it's going and where, rent increases are going to go, and are they going to mandate something, restrict something on that? And so and I know Ms. DeBusk stated that in our last time we talked about this, that developers have said it's difficult to get financing with deed-restricted units. So I think, and they are long-term units, so I think by allowing the in lieu fees to increase and allowing the developer the flexibility of contributing, and this would really help us because we're forming now an affordable housing trust fund. And it's been through finance, it's going back. And in lieu fees could be a good source of dedicated funding for in lieu fees for that trust fund, and then allow us to build more affordable housing. So I think that's one of the keys. And I think we need to consider revising rental housing in the community benefit category. To allow for consideration of height increase in rental housing in exchange for deed-restricted units. So, in other words, if you do the minimum, you're not going to get the community benefit. But if you do more, then you can possibly. What that number is, what it looks like, I don't know. But I think that's important. And I don't know how I feel about this, but one thing that has come up is consider restricting square footage of building amenities since they tend to make rents higher. That might be something to look at. And I've already talked about in lieu fees. And here's another thought about just skipping back to in lieu fees. I'm sorry, this is my lengthiest one, is the first one. so don't get scared when I hop back on the next set. Perhaps the in lieu fee should be higher in the CBD or the priority overlay areas, since almost according to our, on page 28 of our document, I love these statistics, 25% of all AUD, almost 25% of all AUD projects are in the CBD. So I think maybe they should be higher there and then lower elsewhere. Another way to do it would be on the 10 units or less, where I talked about 65% of our AUD projects are 10 units or less. Perhaps that's where they should be lower for some additional incentive. So then we get to mixed use. Another statistic on page 29, 28% of AUD projects are mixed use, while only 17% of AUD-issued building permits are in the high-density zones where mixed-use projects are potentially feasible. So that's 17% in the high-density zones. But then we need to figure out ways, that's where you would tend to see more mixed-use projects. So we need to figure out a way to encourage more mixed-use projects, especially in the high-density zones. 59% of issued building permits are in the priority overlay, and 35% are in the medium-high density zones, where we have the most land area. So that 17% in high density is low. So I'm just saying we need to consider ways to encourage mixed-use projects there. And I had a comment here about add more choices for smaller units at greater densities. And that's just, I think, in all categories and all zones. And that's my last point in that section. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Next, we have Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I can say ditto to most of what Commissioner Wiscombe just noted, but generally, let's see. Looking at the three key objectives, first, encourage smaller units. I agree we need more density and increase the dwelling units per acre. We heard that a lot from hotel projects that have been before us over the past few months, that they need more density, and they would have done housing instead of hotels. In terms of locating units close to transit, commercial services, and recreational opportunities, I think we are starting to locate more units closer to those options as we continue to pursue sustainability and transportation circulation goals. So just keeping that in mind, and is there an option to provide more incentives if they are located near those specific areas? In terms of encouraging workforce housing, it would be great to have a definition of workforce housing and also a definition of attainable housing that's based on our actual workforce. There's a lot of confusion around what is our primary workforce, in different areas in the city of Santa Barbara, and what is attainable for them, and how are we defining attainable? I think there were a couple of notes about that in some of the public comment as well. The second question, should the program do more to increase the rate of housing production? Yes, specifically more affordable housing. And I think in the next couple of segments, we'll talk about more specifics, especially around flexibility and incentives. So I'll keep it to that for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Boss. Next, we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please. And before you begin, I just want to encourage the remaining commissioners to turn on their lights if they want to turn. Go ahead, Commissioner DeLuccio.
Okay, thank you. I didn't really address it this way. I didn't have something in front of me, so the three key objectives, the way you're setting this up, it's fine, I can talk it, but that's not the way I organized it in my mind. But I'll just throw out a couple of things. It's interesting how the priority of this program was to create housing, rental housing. We were successful in doing that. However, we weren't successful in creating a lot of affordable housing out of this program. And I know going in, that really wasn't the objective of this program. It was just affordable by design, have smaller units, and perhaps by having smaller units, you'd have and the rents would be lower, but that's not the way it turned out. But a couple of things that come to mind, what we need to do, just lumping 1 and 2 together, is we keep throwing this word around. We need to come up with a true definition of the workforce housing definition, and I call it maybe the definition is somewhere around the missing middle, which I know could be moderate or a little above moderate. So the missing middle is in order to have housing for teachers, firefighters, police, et cetera. I think that's where we are lacking in providing housing. And also, the other one's community benefit. We need to come up with a better definition of community benefit. Right now, community benefit, as we're defining it, is for all rental housing. I think including market rate housing. As the speaker suggested, we need 8,001 units of housing, and a lot of it is, we are going to do, market rate we can do, it's affordable where we need the help. So maybe the community benefit needs to be better defined as, I don't know if it's exclusively affordable housing, but let's spell out what we're talking about by community benefit, and let's define it in a way where it's going to help us get a more affordable housing. So those are the couple of things. I think I'm just going to stick to those two things right now, and then I'll just add as we go on.
You can always come back.
Thank you.
No problem. And I want to make that clear. If any of my fellow commissioners would like to add something before we move to the next slide, by all means, just turn on your light. So Commissioner Lucho, if you do find that you'd like to say something again, don't hesitate. Next, we have Vice Chair Bauke, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I went through the document and wrote my notes based on sections in the document, not necessarily to the questions. Give me a little bit more liberty to address some comments that I have here. And I probably find myself in maybe an interesting position and not really agreeing with the idea of trying to make the AUD program an affordable housing program. I really believe it has done what it's asked the community to get to, which is produce more rental housing, and it has done that. And it has provided smaller units and density to provide more market rate, primarily, rental housing, and it's done that job. There's a place for that, and we do need more rental housing as a community, but I think it completely falls short of ever becoming or could become an affordable housing program. We should just not waste our time trying to make it an affordable housing program, but to actually create an affordable housing program and the incentives that would go with that. So I just sort of just a big picture comment that in any case, I'll address the comments on the slide. And in sort of the big picture, as I continue to pound the table, and I'll continue to pound the table, we need to actually create, in return for the incentive that the development community has been getting through the AUD, we need to get a corresponding return and the benefit in the public interest. And that can be achieved by collecting the additional property taxes associated with increased assessed valuations resulting from all these new projects under the AUD program. And we need to tie into this program and any affordable housing program, and maybe even beyond that, a value recapture system such as an enhanced infrastructure finance district. That's the only way we're going to get real dollars to actually target that piece of the affordable housing spectrum in which isn't getting tax credits and the market itself can't provide because of the cost of construction and land costs. So to put that out there. As to the document, the program we have, the ordinance, as soon as the council adopts it in December, we need to get it back to the Coastal Commission and get it approved so it can be applied in the coastal zone. It's something that's sort of missing and has been laying out there for a long time. We need to consider expanding the high-density tier, both with an affordable housing program, but also the AUD, to match up with the priority housing overlay that's shown in page 10, basically the Haley corridor. And former Commissioner Campanella provided a number of illustrated examples of locations that we should be having a conversation about increasing the densities in those areas. We need to allow the open yard requirement to be satisfied on other levels than just the ground floor. Courtyard housing projects that can be designed with patios and common areas can do that very well and meets the intent of the open yard that we're striving for just on the ground floor. That's something that could be modified in the AUD ordinance. The inclusionary requirement, which is actually more broad than the AUD, it just happens to be, housing therefore, should be increased to match what Goleta has or something that has the same economics that Goleta has, because we're in the same market area for housing. The in lieu fee should be adjusted, reviewed, and Commissioner Wiscombe brought that up, reviewed and updated and annually updated. The cost of construction continues to move, and our in lieu fee is just, it's almost silly as to the number that we currently have compared to the actual cost of building these units. I mean, we're talking at $25 a square foot is not the cost of construction, much less land costs and cost of construction and financing costs. So it's woefully inadequate. But we should also consider, and I think this is something the development community has brought up, and I honestly believe this probably makes sense, which is to have them actually write the check instead of trying to regulate the 1 or 2 or 10%. We have situations of having like one unit that is regulated and the rest of them aren't as inclusionary, and it's better off, honestly, for the way the financing works for those kind of rental projects is to have them write the check. They can price that into their pro forma, get that into their pro forma that's presented to the bank, and get their financing based on that, and hand a check to the city to go into an inclusionary program that we actually can basically tear off the housing authority or other nonprofit builders and actually get affordable housing that's deed restricted and will work long term. The AAUD program needs to have an annual progress report to the Planning Commission, and so we can see how it's doing. We need to establish a FAR approach for 100% affordable projects and projects under a revised city density bonus program, which would make it have more incentives than the AUD program. We should definitely consider an expedited process for 100% deed restricted affordable housing projects as to the process and even maybe the permit fees for such.
Vice Chair Bauke, please excuse me. I just want to check in for a moment with Ms. DeBusk. I'm aware that he's actually answering some other questions from other slides. Do you mind? No? Okay. So by all means, just keep going. You're going to see
I only
some of
got 3 more on,
No,
and then I have them down. on
I'm
the
not
other
trying to
side.
stop you. I just want to make sure that when you see the questions pop up later, you may have already addressed them, and you're welcome to go deeper at that time if you need to.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me for the interruption.
No problem. And this is back to not the AUD program, but we do need to adopt an adaptive reuse ordinance. And I suggest using the FAR approach with that, and definitely Mr. Romo's comments are on point. And we also had examples and testimony, I believe, about the Balboa building as an example. I mean, we should just look at it as its mass and see what we could physically get in there that meets the building code and let it convert to housing instead of trying to put density numbers to those kind of projects. We need to update the local density bonus ordinance and target it at workforce housing. And I specifically mean that middle, that above what tax credit financed projects can, the affordable housing, the housing authority can get, and focus on that. And we also, as other commissioners noted, we definitely need a definition of workforce housing. I suggested last time using the Urban Land Institute's one. There are others they go from like 60 and up. And maybe that's maybe too low in our case, but we need to calibrate workforce housing to our workforce, especially for essential workers. So those are the comments I have on this particular section. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bauke. Next, I have Commissioner Lodge, and then I will start taking anyone who may want to come back on before I take my turn. So Commissioner Lodge, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In many respects, I agree with what Commissioner Bauke said. However, I want to back up a little bit. Community benefit in the report is as it stands today, where all rental housing is included. However, I think it's been over 2 years ago, the council voted to eliminate all rental housing from community benefit, and it's in, could you update me on where it is? It's in the general revision of the zoning ordinance. Ms.
I'll
Our
let
city.
Ms. Busk answer that.
Chair Bonderson and Commissioner Lodge, yes, the definition is within our zoning ordinance. For community benefit,
It's changed in
no, it has not been changed. We have not updated it based on council direction.
the council did direct
They did, yes.
that, okay, all right. When is it anticipated to be?
Chair Bonderson and Commissioner Lodge, I don't have an answer for that. We have a pretty extensive work program for the next few years, in part because of all the policies and programs coming out of the housing element. And so right now, we're looking at how to best manage all of that. And so I don't know when that's going to fall into it. I think that's actually one of the longer-term types of improvements where we really need to look at all the things that go into it, including the in-lieu fees, which will take some additional study.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to go back in time, if I may, because to clarify what the AUD program grew out of. And the city started work on and I was involved in all of this, the city started work on a general plan update in 2006. By 2010, the city was at an impasse between those who wanted to up density everywhere and those that didn't want to up density anywhere. I suggested a compromise, which was that an experiment be made, and the result was the high priority overlay. I drew a map back in 2010, which is what the city has used, although they upped the densities from what I suggested. And then Council Member Dale Francisco came up with the idea of the 250, that we stop and look at it and see if it's providing the kind of housing we needed. After 250 units, or after, it was 8 years, I think. And what we saw as a result, and the density was increased, and we have the area that's the high priority overlay, which is, I think really all of this discussion is basically around that, not the other tiers, which are modest densities, and they reflect pretty much what the densities in those zones were prior to the adoption of the AUD ordinance. So presumably rents would be, well, then in 2011, in July, the architects and developers and housing advocates had a 2-weekend-long design charrette in which they sought to prove that they could build at increased densities, market rate affordable rentals and for sale units. They showed that they could, as they did the numbers then, that they could build rental units at affordable market rate workforce affordable units with higher densities, but actually their numbers for sale units showed that they couldn't. And so that's why it became an all rental only a rental housing program. Well, and as we know, even at these, many of the units of the projects went up to 63 units to the acre, the max, which is 2 to 3 times the density allowed by any other jurisdiction in the Tri-County area. Nobody goes so high. And the end result still has been 2-bedroom units, two-bedroom, 2-bath units that will go for rent at $7,000 a month. And I've looked at one of those projects in particular yesterday, and their rents have come down, but they're still astronomical. The end result was units, well, and what, as I said, the developers said, that it would produce workforce affordable housing, and I was naive or dumb, or both, and the rents will be what the market will bear, and that's what we've seen. And I would like to go in a completely different direction and do what Cambridge, Massachusetts has done, and which is to create a priority overlay that is entirely for affordable, capital A affordable housing. And it's been, I spoke this morning to one of the planners there, and it's been extremely successful, and they've had hundreds of units built. I don't know what we do about the unintended consequence of the increase of property values with the increased density, which wouldn't be there if it was all required to be capital A affordable. But it seems to me that's the only way we're going to get truly affordable, the kind of housing we need. You know, what we're not meeting, all the very low income, moderate income that is required in the housing element. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. I'm now going to go around the circle again and take anyone who wants to speak a second time before I take my turn. And I have Commissioner Boss waiting, so go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a clarification when I noted we need the definition of workforce housing and attainable housing. A suggestion that I have is to make sure that you're including specific AMI based on our existing workforce and what's attainable for them.
And next we have Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you. I think Vice Chair Balke can tell me this. I have it here somewhere, but Goleta defines workforce housing as, where is it here? It's, help me out here.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Balke, because I know it's here somewhere. Because they include it as one of their categories in their inclusionary. Oh, here it is. 4% affordable to workforce households. That's above moderate income households using 120 to 200% of the median income. That's how they define it. And then there's another jurisdiction that defines it as including moderate. So it goes from 80 to maybe 200. So those are two kind of different ways to look at it. So I wanted to make that comment. And the other comment I want to make is something related to Commissioner Lodge and a community of all affordable housing. I think that as in each individual housing project and in our community, we like diversity. So I think that I don't necessarily agree that we should have an area that's all affordable housing. I think that puts labels on people and households, and I like the idea of our providing and our developers and our housing authority and our other nonprofit of developing housing that includes a diversity of income levels and of community members. I think that makes for a stronger community. So that's my comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to add that there's the Santa Barbara factor that we have to deal with. And I know I sent to you a comparison of 800 Santa Barbara Street, which came online at the same time as Cortona Point and Goleta. 800 Santa Barbara Street was 53 units to the acre. Rents began for studios at well over 3,000 and went to over 7,000 for 2 bedrooms. Cortona Point is 20 units to the acre. And it has all kinds of amenities, everything you can think of. Swimming pool, community room, blah, blah, picnic areas, dog park, all these things. And 2 parking spaces per unit. And it's only 20 units to the acre. And I had a little email conversation with Commissioner Bauke about this. Why? How can this be? And it's, Santa Barbara.
What did you say the rent was for the one in Goleta? Do you know? For the same?
It was 1.75. It was almost twice. It was almost half the rent of the 2-bedroom, 2-bath in Santa Barbara. And I also spoke to the developer of that project, and he said they could have gotten more, but they wanted to get the place rented, and so they kept the rents a bit lower than they might be. But, there's it's kind of crazy making, with the land values in Santa Barbara, because it is Santa Barbara. And I think the only way we can get around this is saying it has to be capital A affordable. And as to Commissioner Wiscombe's last comment about diversity in the projects, I don't know how many of the Housing Authority projects you've visited, but they are not, some sort of separated kind of thing where the architecture is less, the maintenance is less. They're better looking and better maintained than a lot of the privately owned multiple unit housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. And I think that's a really interesting part of the conversation that we all should be thinking about. How are the other jurisdictions adjacent to us doing this? And if they're doing better, then what is it that they're doing that makes it more successful? I'm going to take my turn now, and I'm going to do my best to answer the questions as you've listed, and I may miss something, but we'll catch up. I broke mine up into parts as provided in the staff report. So the question, as indicated by the city's general plan, the UD program's key objectives are to encourage smaller units, and yes, I'm in agreement with that. I'll go into more detail at a later time. Locate units close to transit, commercial services, recreational opportunities. Yes, but what is close? And I'm wondering if you have a definition of that before I go on. Is it half a mile?
Chair Bonderson, yeah, typically a half a mile is used as the distance.
It wasn't a test. I was just I was just assuming, because for an ADU project to be exempt from a parking space, it requires you to be half a mile to transit point, and that's why I was asking that question. So that being said, I'm wondering, and again, you may not have an answer today, but for future development of this, do we have a map that demonstrates where the constructed AUD programs are that are located in this way? And if yes, do we also show projects that are not that are not permitted yet, but they're in the process, so that we can see sort of an overview of what's popping up on?
Chair Bonderson, yes, we do have a map with all of the AUD projects on there. It pending, approved, constructed. So all of them are shown on that map.
And if I may add, there are photographs of the built construction. There are plan sets that are included. So it's this whole interactive web map. So it kind of shows the different neighborhoods where they are, the basic information about it, and then imagery for plans and constructed photographs.
And thank you for that extra detail. The reason I'm going in this direction is because I'd like to know if we have a percentage, and I'm assuming we do because you have this data collected, do we have a percentage of which ones are considered close and which ones are not, and therefore are able to identify how we are being successful by providing the closeness?
Chair Bonderson, really the way that the program was developed is the places where they gave the higher density were places that were close. So it was built into the program to begin with. So I think, you know, if we were looking at that, I think the question might be, could we expand that a little bit? Are there areas that are close to all of these things yet weren't identified originally?
So we are thinking the same way. The reason I asked these questions was to make sure that I had the appropriate information to be able to ask or advise or provide my thoughts. So my thoughts are that, and this is not new, I've been saying this for 4 years, I think we have a detriment in our transportation and circulation model for public transportation provided in our community. And that doesn't end at the invisible boundaries of the city. MTD, for example, starts at our transit center, in the center of downtown Santa Barbara, and it takes people all over the county. It takes you to the far ends of Goleta, it takes you to Carpinteria, and then we have other types of buses and other forms of transportation that can get you to Ventura and to North County. And I think that there are extensive amounts of limitations that detract the attractiveness of someone wanting to or being able to use our public transportation in the way that a community needs to use public transportation. And if and when we can solve this and make the community of Santa Barbara and its neighboring communities able to have a functional, attractive, useful transit model, then I think that the overall ability to create housing the way that our goals are being laid out in a lot of these conversations, it's going to be promoted. It's going to be supportable. And I like to share a little anecdote, a little story. I know we don't go into stories very often at the Planning Commission, but I saw a movie when I was probably, in college, many years ago. You may know it. It's called Under the Tuscan Sun, and it's a cute little movie about a woman who goes to Italy, and she's hoping to achieve some goals in her life. And when it didn't work out exactly the way she wanted, somebody in the movie told her this story, and it's always stayed with me. He explained that the tracks for a train between Italy and Austria over the Alps was laid out long before there was a train that could handle that type of journey, that could handle the journey over the mountain. We're talking, hundreds of years ago when those types of train models didn't exist yet. But they laid the tracks, they laid the infrastructure, so when that train was available, when it was invented, that trip could be made. And I feel like that is the definition of everything we're trying to do in a master plan. You're looking 10, 20, 30 years ahead of time. And if we don't get the infrastructure for a transportation model to function that brings people in and distributes them throughout our community, then it's not appropriate to remove cars because there's no alternative. And you can't encourage everyone to walk or take bicycles. That's just not possible for everyone. So how do we set up an inclusionary model and promote housing when there may be people who can't get to work if they live in the city of Santa Barbara and work at UCSB, or they work a few miles away and they can't walk, but they don't have a car? The reason this is so important to me is because the system we currently have, and I've done a lot of studies on this, either the hours don't work, where the last bus may depart, I don't have the schedule accurately and currently, but it may not allow enough time for somebody to work a service schedule, and they're working at a restaurant, the restaurant closes at 10 or 11, there's no buses at that time. In fact, there's even a lack of some bus lines after 5 p.m. So if you're working a 8 to 5 job, you may not even be eligible to take a bus because the bus doesn't go to your neighborhood at that time. So another part of that I really want to encourage is it's an infrastructure issue, and it requires more stops. It requires more service lines to a wider network of locations so people don't have to get off the bus and then walk 20 or 30 minutes. It requires lighting because people may not feel comfortable walking in the dark if their bus, even if it's a great schedule, but they get off and they have to walk in the dark. It's not a safety. We need to consider safety, and it's not safe. So without going into any more on that, I just want to say it's really important, I believe, that we are looking at this concurrently and very actively to set up that train that goes to the Alps. We set up that infrastructure, even if we don't have the system in place yet, so that it serves when we get the density, when we get the housing built, when we get what we're looking to do here today. And lastly, I know that it's been brought up a number of times, but getting a trolley for the shorter distances, looking at those buses that bring people in and get people out from Ventura and North County. We have those currently in place for a lot of our workforce that works on an 8 to 5, but what about those that work until 6? What about those who work service jobs and don't come in until perhaps noon or 3 and leave at 10 p.m. or midnight? There should be an extension of those. Workforce housing, I agree with my colleagues when they talk about the definition, the need for a definition. And when we speak about having a clear definition and what type of workers we're talking about, I think it's really important to really capture the fact that our workforce doesn't just include the ones that we've listed or the obvious ones, service workers, public service, young professionals, regardless of what field they may be in, middle-aged professionals. You know, it's really unfortunate that we think that once we achieve a certain age, we should be making a certain income, and we now can afford all these things. You know, I consider myself to have a pretty darn good career, but I wouldn't fall into the missing middle because our point of affordable or poverty income is a lot higher than other areas in the state or in the nation. And that's really unfortunate because there's a misconception that that definition just means something where it does not truly apply in our community. And so speaking of the AMI, speaking of that definition, I really think that we need to start putting a numerical value, even if that numerical value changes annually, but a numerical value on what's going on with the rent and what's really happening in our community with incomes in real time and regularly updated, so there's not a misconception, a misunderstanding of what that number is. Because I can tell you, when we talk about the rents that the market will bear, that's a very different number than what the moderate income household can handle. It's a burden. And we don't talk about that very often. We just use those terms very liberally. And in this community, it's not the right term. So either we have to change the terminology and put numerical values on it and actually match them regularly, because the rents are flying high. They're skyrocketing faster than our income is being increased. And we need to acknowledge that. I don't think anybody, even the wealthiest in our community, are really that happy about just, you know, shipping out their money just because they can do it. It's not fair to anybody to be giving out 30, 40, 50, 60% of their income on their rent or on their mortgages. So I just really think that we need to talk about real numbers, and if that requires the deed restriction to help keep numbers lower so that the income rates can keep up or meet the market value, then whatever it is that we need to do, I'm not a specialist on that, but I think we need to get our numbers right and our definition right, so we have something to work with. I also want to share that the city should consider looking into public and private partnerships, and to look at what the county of Santa Barbara has been doing lately, how they do public and private partnerships for the public good. There's a lot of money that can be harnessed for these types of uses, and I'm assuming that that probably falls on council to consider whether or not they want to sit down with the private sector, people in the private sector, and look at properties that are available and figure out how to team up and do partnerships that may shift the way that the city manages the housing efforts. This is such a complex proposition for any community. I just feel like we're not alone in this, and there's a lot of other, communities in the state of California facing this shortage of the workforce housing, and it's going to take a lot of brainstorming and collaboration to get us where we want it to be. So I'll stop there. I think there's other things that I should touch on, but I could maybe stuff it in somewhere else. And I appreciate being able to do these questions like slide by slide. So let's move forward.
Okay, the next topic area is about the projects.
All right, just a quick introduction. If you don't mind, I'll just read this. How could density tier boundaries and zones be modified to allow greater density in more areas of the city? Number 5, should development standards identified as constraints such as parking for 3-bedroom units and open yard be changed to incentivize housing? And 6, should rounding of density calculations be revisited to allow projects to provide the most possible units within current density ranges, i.e. round up rather than down? Great question, actually. So I'll welcome my fellow commissioners to turn on their lights. Thank you for breaking the ice again. Commissioner Wiscombe, it's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, I'm not going to be very long on these. Okay, how could density tier boundaries and zones be modified to allow greater density in more areas? I think John Campanella in his public comment identified quite a few areas where he thought we could, the Haley-Coda corridor, State Street from Arriaga up to Mission, and State Street from Constance up to Hope, and along De La Vena Street from Constance up to the State Street intersection. All of these are, I guess, currently medium-high density, and he thought that they might be good prospects for high density. So I think that's a good place to start. I also think when negotiations go on about Paseo Nuevo and Macy's, that we remain flexible, because I think that's it's so important that we eventually develop some housing at Paseo Nuevo and Macy's. I know that's the city's hired someone to work on that with Alliance Bernstein, who are the ground lease owners. But I think that's another way that we need to make that a high priority. Vice Chair Bauke mentioned this, and John Campanella mentioned it in his letter, and I absolutely agree with it. Do not limit density when repurposing existing buildings citywide. I think that's really important. We've got a lot of buildings here that are vacant and could potentially be housing. We have to be more flexible. As long as we're satisfying our building codes and our safety codes, then we need to be more flexible with those and basically not limit to the density there. Okay, and then on Should development standards identified as constraints, parking for 3-bedroom units and open yard be changed to incentivize housing? I already said yes, 1 space per 3-bedroom unit, but develop a stronger program to connect the downtown parking lots with the rental units so those that have cars have the flexibility to park in the nearby city facilities. I think that's important. And I think that one thing to look at, and, you know, I'm a landscape architect, so open yard's kind of important, but I'm going to say this anyway. Consider relaxing, and not necessarily eliminating, but relaxing open yard requirements in projects that are within a quarter mile or less of public open space. So parks, plazas, any open space. It's not that far away. So I think, I think we need the flexibility of allowing balconies and maybe not having that 1 space. But that would be kind of an interesting way to look at it. You know, a project that's close to De La Guerra Plaza where, you can go and enjoy the outdoors might be, or Ellis Keck Park or whatever, would, be projects that where maybe we could relax the open space requirements. I know we already talked about repurposing, so I think that's it. And then should rounding of density calculations, I said that on the first round. Yes, absolutely, definitely, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
I'll go backwards and all over the place. We'll start with number 6. I think obviously rounding up is a no-brainer. And number 4, I will defer to John Campanella's his recommendation, and I think Commissioner Wisdom has already stated that into the record. The 5th one, development standards identified as constraints, is a little more complicated. And what I keep thinking about is this program, the AUD program, is just, we have to think of it in terms of how does it fold into the whole, to everything else, the whole zoning ordinance. And also what keeps coming to mind is, we talk about parking here. Yeah, 1 parking space per 3-bedroom unit is fine, but the state just passed something where it doesn't require to have any parking if you're within a half mile of public transit. So we need to take that into consideration. Also, we need to think of as whole the state bonus density, all the other things that have been passed, and how is that going to affect the AUD program? So, so it's hard to really, in some cases, just look at this as just a single program, the AUD program. We need to fold it into everything else. Yes, we do need to have perhaps within this program, together with the same state bonus density, we need to offer some more incentives to get affordable housing out of this program, because it seems like that wasn't the intent initially, but that's what this is turning into, with such emphasis in the city on affordable housing, to use this program as perhaps one way to get there. So I think right now it's 10% moderate you need to offer. Maybe we need to increase this a little bit, or increase it to ways that incentives, you're going to get incentives, you need to offer not only moderate, maybe it's 20% total, or if you offer affordable housing, the lower, maybe you get more incentives that way out of this program. When we're talking about the open yards, for example, or in setbacks, or some greater height, or a parking reduction to the extent we can offer that, reduction in processing fees, streamlining approvals, et cetera. So I'll just throw some of those things out right now.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll agree with most of the comments already from my fellow commissioners. A couple of things on this slide. First, I do want to go back to the program overview and note that I'd support an affordable housing overlay if that was to incentivize housing, meeting our community needs and the housing that's really demanded by our RHNA figures. With specific answers to the questions, I think you've heard from community members about modifications to density tier boundaries and zones. I I know that I've been to many of those workshops where we're writing on maps and providing suggestions, so you have all of those materials. My personal suggestions were not taken. I live on the Mesa, so I was really looking for more density. I live in a condo in an affordable ownership unit on the Mesa, and I'd like to see more of that. So I think revisiting some of the materials that you already have, those needs haven't changed, and a lot of those suggestions probably haven't changed. One of the public commenters also give examples to consider, I especially like do not limit density when repurposing existing buildings. A couple have already said that. And I'd add, especially if producing affordable housing units. One of the survey respondents in the progress report noted recommendation to eliminate density constraints and limit only net floor area, so essentially the FAR limits. And in terms of addressing constraints with specific changes, a couple of things came from the progress report, and I think these were from the surveys as well. The most important incentive by far was the reduced parking requirement, and they recommended further reduction, so one space for a zip car or a shared vehicle that could make sense if combined with a requirement that residents not have a vehicle. And they recommended a better option might be requiring permits for overnight street parking, so an incentive paired with a requirement. And I think it's important to note that public housing authorities can require no vehicle, and they check registration to make sure that there aren't any vehicles. So they're not just parking them, but not naming them on their lease. So with those capital A affordable housing developments, that's something that they can take into account. And I'd also recommend reducing, or I think Commissioner Wiscombe said relaxing, open yard minimums, especially in areas where there are recreational opportunities, and I think you mentioned that a bit as well. And then also agree with rounding up to allow for more units. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Boss. Next, we have Vice Chair Balke, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll answer the first question, number 4. I provided you those comments, which is, so we'll move on from that one. Also made comments on the open yard, is that it should allow it to be on multiple floors. As to the parking, I think we need to look at the core in the downtown area, specifically as a system, and that the public parking lots that the city has should be part of a system, and just like Commissioner Boss noted, with the permits for parking, that they should all be tied into a package that works, and you can establish basically this done on a 24-hour basis, which is what most urban downtowns that have parking management programs actually work that whole system, and then they could tweak the allowance or time of parking at certain locations to get the right turnover and such. And Ventura went through a whole drill of that a number of years, if you want to go look into that program, which Nelson Nygaard did. So parking is a component, and that should be something that's tied into this. And those are the answers I have to the questions 4 and 5. And as to the density calculations, I think it's just straightforward. We should just round up. It's just very, very clear. Now, when we come to situations in which we get on to the inclusionary, which I think a process of basically having the fractional portion be part of an in lieu fee makes a lot of sense. This way you don't get into that game of, oh, round up, round down, and they start playing with their project just to not to skip it. Just basically let them write a check for that piece would be appropriate. I do have other comments that were part of the report in this section, so I'm going to add those to the record. One, you made, there was a comment as to, on page 29, regarding that the AUD program doesn't allow conversion of AUD projects to hotels, and I think that's a great idea. But I think we should, and you also asked this question, or sort of bait the question, let's put it that way, as to hotels. And I really think we need to have that discussion about prohibiting the conversion of residential units to hotels, and to require a conditional use permit at a minimum with required findings that there's no net loss in housing units from hotel conversions. So that's an issue that's been lurking out there, and it's not going away, and Mr. Romo made good comments of why that's the case. So that's what I have on this section. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll begin with Commissioner Bucky's last comment. I agree on the hotel conversions. I don't know what the city would gain if it allowed greater density in more areas of the city. I saw the program as doing what we were told it would do in the first place, provide affordable, workforce affordable housing. And we've seen that it does not. There is the issue of, the more housing units there are available, the less the pressure on what there is and competition amongst renters about what they can get. But I don't see any advantage to it. And what developers consider constraints are things that I think are very important to preserve for especially open yard. I'm really concerned about the livability of these units. And yes, you can, there was a discussion about, there was an effort to get rid of the requirements of individual open yard or common open yard. And people were saying, oh, people can just go outside to State Street or to a park. But that is to not be able to step outside from one's unit and have a place where you can have a plant or whatever. It just, the quality of life is greatly decreased. I'm okay with rounding density calculations up, although I guess that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. So I'll take my turn, and I will welcome anyone who may want to speak again after me before we close this slide. Question number one, and I want to bring up the point that as long as our zoning allows both residential and commercial, we're going to likely continue to see projects, as we've seen so many this year, that have the option of switching from housing to a hotel, for example, simply because it pencils out or because they're able to manage the development in a way where they can succeed, where they can conclude a project. And we've had practitioners come before us, applicants come before us, and share that information with us and explain, and I'm going to quote a famous favorite of our 2023 year, has been penciling out. Things penciling out, not penciling out, why they don't pencil out. And it's become almost like a negative term amongst us because it's such a real issue. And what we've heard over and over again is they simply cannot get the density. And I know that it's not in the PC's purview to go into the financial feasibility of these projects, but I'm here to tell you as a practitioner myself that the economics are real. And I think that if I had learned more about this earlier on in my Planning Commission tenure, I would very likely have voted on a number of projects differently. I was very lucky this year to receive what I like to just call training, although it wasn't called training, it was just a meeting I had for a project of my own, where I was able to get basically a crash course in how the inclusionary portion forces the market value units to have to increase rents or cost of sale in order to cover the cost of the inclusionary unit once the project has been completed, and how lenders often look at that issue as, you know, if a developer is getting only a 2% turnaround on the inclusionary unit, then the lender may look at that as a risk and not necessarily support the project or make it really difficult. And as we all know, in order for a developer to be able to get some real numbers and some predictability, it's easier for them to just pay the in lieu fee, know what their bottom line is, and move forward, and then recover the cost later on by hiking up the market value the rental value or the sale value of the market rate units. So that doesn't help keep our rental rates or our sale rates at a place that supports the income of our community. It just keeps hiking it up, and it hurts the majority of people living here, even the wealthier people, and definitely excludes people who are not in that range to be able to afford those rents or those sale costs. And so had I had that training previously, I think I would have done a lot of things differently as a planning commissioner. I have spoken to Mr. Busk about this. This is not new, but I suggested in some way, in some format, if it's appropriate and it's legal, for all of us, from staff to commissioners to review boards, all of us to be able to get trained in that type of information in real time from real practitioners, not because they're supposed to influence our decisions, but for us to understand how these types of projects are being processed and how they cost and what it takes to go through the process. I think we would all benefit from being better educated and regularly updated because the costs keep going up for construction, as many of us know. The next question about parking and open yard, absolutely. I understand and agree with Commissioner Wiscombe and how, from a landscape architect, from a design perspective, outdoor space is vital. And again, I do want to also agree here with Commissioner Lodge about livability. We have seen projects where the rooms are so small, they open up to sometimes walls or hallways, and that's not comfortable. We need to support light, get air, get the ability to open a window and get, access to the outside. Now, does every type of development support common or private open yard? I think we need to start looking at that from a project-to-project basis, especially when we're looking at projects that can promote adaptable reuse. And I'm going to bring up a particular project as an example. It still burns me quite a bit. It's a project that we saw earlier this year that was for Condo Hotel in Garden Street. And I specifically asked the applicant, have you considered housing? And his explanation made perfect sense to me. His explanation was, yes, he and staff tried, and they tried, and they tried, and I believe him. But they weren't able to get the open yard and the parking to work. And that's why they had no other choice than to move in this direction. And we had no other choice than to approve the project. If we had had the flexibility, that property owner was very interested in making that project into housing. And we could have had, I believe, 13 new units using the adaptable resource mechanism. We just wouldn't have had it looking as traditional as we expect it to look by meeting all of our current open yard and parking requirements. And that's what I mean when I say we need to be looking at this on a case-to-case basis, if it's a mod, if it's a variance, if it's a discretionary item, where we give that type of flexibility and provide options, true options, creative options, to allow someone who wants housing, who's willing to give us housing, to have that option and take it to the finish line. Parking, I have a slightly different perspective. It may even contradict the fact that I just said this one, but I stand in a slightly different position than my colleagues on parking. I think parking tends to be a little bit of an inclusivity, exclusivity issue because not every single person has the ability, again, to give up a car in lieu of a bicycle or walking. I will tell you personally, this is a passion of mine because I'm one of those people. I have had 5 knee surgeries on one knee, one on the other, and I have back injuries since I was a teenager. I love to walk. I love to ride my bike, but it wouldn't be something I could do every day because it hurts, and then it causes me not to be able to do it the next day. So that wouldn't be, that's a lifestyle issue. And today that I have a child, it would be even harder because of the limiting factors I may have. And so when we look at the elderly, when we look at families with small children, we look at people with disabilities, removing parking, removing the ability to have a car causes exclusivity that I simply can't support. That doesn't mean that we don't follow the state mandates. They have removed the requirements for cars, and we can't force that upon the developers. But I want to continue to encourage, and I know we are trying, we're doing this, but I think it needs to be a bigger effort and a more outgoing effort to encourage people with these types of disabilities or disadvantages, even if they're temporary disadvantages, to have the ability to park nearby. Whether that means in some of these lots that we have spots available for, whether it means some type of agreement with the property owner where the property owner has a few parking spots and maybe they're the ones who purchase it. But when we see projects that have absolutely none, and they may not even be required to provide a DA or more than one or whatever the minimum might be, then you're literally excluding people that may want and need to live downtown. And others who don't, well, they'll look for options elsewhere. But I think that that needs to constantly be a considering factor for all of us, is inclusivity. For number 3, I'll keep it short. The answer is yes. And we can move on. But before I do, I just want to welcome anyone if they have anything else to add. Okay, then let's move on to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're now into the units themselves, and I can read the questions if that helps. Number 7, if desired, how can the AUD program encourage smaller entry-level home ownership units? For example, include condominiums in the priority housing overlay. Number 8, how can the inclusionary requirement for rental housing be revised to spur the creation of more deed-restricted affordable units? For example, bonus density or an all-in-lieu fee. Number 9, should the city's density bonus program, which only allows low-income bonus density units for rental projects currently, be amended to allow more flexibility or different affordability levels?
Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay. Entry-level home ownership, I think that's key. It's really important. I think there are ways to accomplish that. First-time home ownership should be encouraged, and perhaps if we went to an option of an all-in-lieu fee, I think that part of that in-lieu fee should probably be available to first-time home buyers as low-interest loans. So we can encourage home ownership. Just as an aside, on October 30th, HCD announced that California is receiving from the federal government $443 million for various housing projects. And I think there's all sorts of projects, but one of them I think involved home ownership. But that's something that I think is really exciting, and I'm glad the state is recognizing that as also important. You don't want to have people who want to own homes just be in that continuous treadmill of not being able to do that. Condominiums should be allowed in the priority overlay. We definitely want a vibrant and diverse downtown area, and ownership is a real investment in downtown. So how we get there, I don't know, but I think that's a key. How can the inclusionary requirement for rental housing be revised to spur the creation of more deed-restricted affordable units? It's just repeating myself again. We need to offer the option of in lieu fees, and perhaps leave, use in lieu fees for low-cost loans for first-time home buyers and for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, so our housing authority and other nonprofits can leverage these funds into deed-restricted units. And a really good example of that is the project that we reviewed and approved on the Carrillo commuter lot. That's a very diverse housing authority project. And it's a partnership. We've talked up here about a partnership between private and our housing authority. And it includes a diversity in the deed-restricted units, which I think is really good. So that's kind of a model project, I think, that we should be looking toward. And I think we can accomplish that when we see more about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We can accomplish that. I'm really excited that that's moving forward, and hopefully we'll get a dedicated source of funds that can be leveraged by our 501c3s for grants and other to leverage funding for housing. One thing I wanted to say, feedback from private developers that it's difficult to obtain financing for developments with deed-restricted units. We've heard that many times. We heard it today. And on page 60 of the report, it's stated, after inclusionary went into effect, there was a slight, and I emphasize the word slight, slowdown by one application per year from 3.7 to 2.7 for projects of 10 units or more. Well, we've learned that most of our projects are less than 10 units, but that's a 30% decrease. And so I don't call that slight at all. I think that's if you're going down by one application and it's a 30% decrease when we put inclusionary into effect, it's starting to tell you something. Unfortunately, we haven't followed that. I have one question, Mr. Busk. When our private developers have converted from housing to hotel projects, have we actually, as a city, had a conversation as to why they've done that? Is it as to what their reasoning is, other than it doesn't pencil out? Are they talking about the inclusionary factor of it, or?
Chair Bonderson and Commissioner Wiscombe, the developers that I've talked to with those projects, it was always the density. They did not have the density.
The density, okay, thank you. Deed-restricted units should be a mix of very low, low, and moderate, and middle, if feasible, to provide diversity in developments. I know middle, HCD doesn't count middle, they only count moderate, but I think we need to look at middle too, on the missing middle. Should the city's density bonus program, which allows only low-income bonus units for rental projects, be amended to allow for more flexibility for different affordability levels? Absolutely. No question about it. We need more moderate income level housing. And I thought really the League of Women Voters, the chart they put in showing the amount of moderate, you could barely see it on the chart. I mean, it was just so tiny. Their charts were really good in their document. And again, we need to define workforce housing. And we should encourage, this just goes back to what I said before about the Carrillo commuter lot. We need to encourage a variety of affordability levels within any development. I think that's just important from a community perspective. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the first question, I know that the goal of this program was to produce rental housing, and it has. And I want to acknowledge some of the concerns expressed in public comment about allowing ownership and possibly chilling rental housing development, but I'm considering that in the context of the actual report and the data. So I just want to read that aloud in case folks missed it. Only the priority housing overlay requires units to be rental housing, and just 59% of AUD units are in the priority housing overlay. The remaining 41% of AUD units had the opportunity of being developed as either ownership or rental units, and yet almost none of the AUD projects are ownership units. And again, this program was developed to incentivize development of rental housing, not home ownership, and it did that. If we are going to consider ownership in or outside of the priority housing overlay, it's important to prioritize or require affordable housing, and I'll agree with prioritizing first-time home ownership as well. There was a note in the survey section of the progress report that there is a place in the market for much smaller ownership units now, and we should have the ability to address that buyer type. So again, yes, through an affordable housing priority, we have smaller units with owners who use them as existing smaller units that are owned by people who use them as vacation rentals or their own vacation homes. So I want to make sure that we're not encouraging more of that. We don't need more of that. We need more home ownership units for different categories of income. And I want to also call out or prioritize their lower income brackets, because there are programs that are developed or that are working to incentivize first-time home buyers who are in the lower income brackets, like family self-sufficiency programs. So I want to make sure that we're including them, that it's not just the middle or moderate income that's being incentivized. And then whatever we can do to incentivize employer-sponsored housing, whether it's rental or ownership. I know that we've seen some great programs around ownership in the past, but I think it's been a while in our community. So that's something that we need to consider. For question 2, I think this falls under question 2. We got a couple of comments about only allowing community benefit if it is affordable housing. So not more broadly just rental housing or any other projects, but only allowing it if it is affordable housing. And also want to acknowledge and consider a higher in lieu fee. The third question. Any development that provides 100% deed-restricted affordable housing should have increased flexibility. I think one of the comments was that could include setbacks, height limit, and open space waivers. So again, more flexibilities, but keep that focused on producing rental or housing that is targeted to more low-income categories. We're doing a great job of developing everything but lower-income housing, so I want to make sure that's prioritized. The progress report also noted that the inclusionary housing requirement was one of the most disliked elements of the program and was perceived as a significant hurdle keeping projects from moving forward. They noted that a higher in lieu fee is preferred, but said it's also critical to have mechanisms to offset the costs, such as density bonuses. And I also want to note that despite the perception and anecdotal comments, the data shows us that the number of applications mostly remained the same after the inclusionary requirement was put in place. And I recognize there's the distinction between just smaller numbers and percentages, but it remained mostly the same from how I understood it. There was also a comment in the progress report to provide offsets for inclusionary requirements to compensate developers for those costs. So I think we've said it 20 times, but additional density, eliminate parking requirements. But this comment also recommended abbreviating or eliminating the design review process for AUD projects. So implementing objective design review standards with expedited staff level approval. And they want to focus on housing people, not cars. I think we get into the process next, so I'll hold that until then. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
Thank you. Question number 1, include condominiums. Yeah, as long as we're looking at entry-level households, I'm fine with that, because the purpose of this program was to produce rental housing in the city, and before this program went into place, we were getting just condominiums. And again, we also should come up with a definition of what we mean by by home ownership for first-time buyers. Let's put that in there. And also, there's a lot of programs out there which they do qualify first-time home buyers. I know one, for example, which I had many years ago, was an FHA loan. So I know those are still available. Bonus density or in lieu fees, the second question here. I think that currently, if you have, I believe for this program, it's all moderate, 10%, and if you're over a certain threshold, is it 10 units or more, you pay into the fund. You have to put the units on site. If it's less, you pay into an in lieu fee. So I think, obviously, for the smaller number of units, you want to continue with the in lieu fee, and look at perhaps adjusting the fee up. I guess that's, obviously, it's a recommendation of the city council. They're the ones who would have to do that. And then I think maybe we should throw out an option when it's over 10, maybe give the developer the option of either paying into an in lieu fee or fund, or to put the units on the site as they've been doing right now. Should the city's density bonus program, which only allows low-income bonus units for rental products, be amended to allow more flexibility? Yes. That goes back to coming up first, we need to define what community benefit means, obviously. Right now, it's all rental units, and this program's moderate. We need to have more flexibility to add some lower affordable units into this program, and maybe that's where some of the incentives, I'm not going to go over them again right now, that we've been discussing here would kick in to encourage that. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner, Vice Chair Bauke, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As to the first question, number 7, as I mentioned in my introductory comments, I do not believe the AUD program should be anything but a rental housing program. And as Commissioner Wiscombe noted, there's very much a lot of benefits of having home ownership, especially entry-level home ownership in the core of the community, to make it a more stable location. And my comment is that should be through its own program. How we do that is yet to be determined. It could be done as some amendments to the priority housing overlay, or through expansions or changes to the city's density bonus program, or some other mechanism, but it should be considered, but it shouldn't be part of this program. As to the number 8, as I mentioned before, I think we should increase the inclusionary requirement to be very similar to what we have in Goleta, and also look at what the county also may have, so we're not inconsistent with sort of what the market is. And I mentioned before, as to the in lieu fee on this program, we might want to consider just basically making it something you could write the check for, but those fees need to be updated, and it should be reflective of the actually true cost of construction of those units, so they could make a choice, but it shouldn't be an incentive to write the check like it is currently, unfortunately. As to the city's density bonus program, definitely needs to be expanded, enhanced, and I think that's where maybe our efforts on getting affordable housing with a capital A, deed restricted affordable housing should go, and we should look at how we can make our program target what we need, which is basically that middle gap tier, anything basically over what the tax credits is, basically the 60% AMI and up categories. And also, we should look at how we can provide incentives that exceed the state. The state, we can't have people just default to the state because that doesn't really get us what we want. It does give us affordable housing, but doesn't necessarily get it into the area that we really need, which is the above 60 AMI, quote, workforce housing category. And there was a comment on page 43, which I think we should address, which is It notes that non-AUD rental projects aren't required to have inclusionary, they have no inclusionary requirement. We should be consistent. There shouldn't be a distinction of having them have none, and the AUD having a percentage. There shouldn't be any dislocation there or distinctions between the two. So those are my comments on this section. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Number 7, I think it would be desirable to have homeownership units in more of them and included in the priority housing overlay, but I don't know how to achieve that. Number 8, I think the in lieu fee is, Mr. Balke, were you the one that said silly in reference to
Well,
it?
it's only $25, it's only
Yeah.
$25 a square foot right now, and I can tell you right now, you could add a 0 to it, and you still would be at the construction cost level in Santa Barbara, so.
Yeah, well,
Chair-
I agree with you. on
Chair
that.
Bonderson, Commissioner Balke, just to clarify, it's not $25 per square foot of the unit, it's of the development. So if the development has 9 units, it totals 10,000 square feet. You're paying $25 per 10,000 square feet. So it's not meant to equate to how much it costs to actually build the affordable unit, just to clarify. So
But
it's still low.
It's still significantly low.
Yes.
Okay, that's-
Yeah, okay, well, yeah, that needs to be examined and adjusted upwards. I could go with with the city's density bonus program, which only allows low-income bonus units for rental projects to be amended to allow more flexibility or particularly different affordability levels. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wiscombe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify one thing, to go back to question number 7. In terms of home ownership, I'm not advocating that the AUD program take on home ownership. What I'm saying is that if we increase in lieu fees and we develop a pot of in lieu fees, I think part of those in lieu fees from projects in the AUD program could go to low-cost loans for home ownership, develop some sort of a program. So that's just 2 separate things. So just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll take my turn. If anyone would like to come back on, please don't hesitate to, do you want to do it now? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Just wanted
Delucci.
clarification on something, actually. When I read question number 9, it says, should the city's density program, are we talking now about the AUD program or outside the program?
Chair Bonderson and Commissioner DeLuccio, the city's density bonus program is outside of the AUD program. It's a separate
Right.
program that basically says any additional density needs to be a low-income housing unit.
So there is a program in place right now, then?
There's a program, but it's incredibly restrictive.
Right, because that's why I'm asking that question, because I haven't really seen a citywide program in place. So that's correct, then? Okay, so that's something, obviously, which we may have touched on outside of the AUD program today, that we need to be looking at a citywide program.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so going down the list, I would like to start with a question. When we talk about encouraging smaller entry-level homeownership units, I'd like to know who's monitoring to ensure that as these units, current units, turn over, that a new buyer, a new owner, are in the same entry-level income category. What's the system that's in place now to make sure that they maintain that status as they change hands?
Chair Bonderson, we don't currently have a first-time homebuyer program per se, but we do have an inclusionary requirement for sale development, and the city's housing division within community development is the one that monitors that.
And is there something that an applicant or homeowner signs, or is it put into conditions of approval? How do we legally tie that?
Chair Bonderson, it's included in the conditions of approval, and then there is a covenant that is required prior to building permit.
Perfect. That's what I thought. I'm glad we got that on the record. I would just say straightforward, if amendments to this is an option, I would support getting rental units and homeownership in the priority housing overlay, straightforward. I also want to mention that I agree with many of the things that Commissioner Boss mentioned, and I want to elaborate in my own words my feelings about the short-term rentals and how, unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that with regard to the purchase, the ownership of that type of homeownership. But we do have a system in place that hasn't been, what's the word I'm looking for? It has not evolved aggressively enough to limit the utilization of short-term vacation rentals. From my knowledge, and it may have changed since I last checked, we don't provide business licenses, but we also don't enforce the fact that homeowners are renting out their units for short-term rentals, and we accept TOTs, meaning that we are aware they're doing it, but we don't have any legal enforcement to restrict that activity.
Chair Bonderson?
Yes?
That's actually not true.
Okay.
Our office has a enforcement team with 3 investigators and a supervising investigator that's actively enforcing on illegal vacation rentals. So we are enforcing on those.
And I don't know if the camera caught it, but I was smiling when you said that. I'm happy to hear that, and that's actually new to me. I wasn't aware of this system that's in place. I'm happy to know that that's taking place. Because, as you can imagine where I'm going with this, that takes away from our housing stock, and it also competes with the ability for first-time homeownership owners to potentially be able to have those available for them, that competition that's in place for homeowners that have multiple units for different purposes. Now, it's not our place to tell people how to own homes. I just want to make sure that in any way possible, we can help prioritize first-time homeownership and support first-time home buyers. So that being said, I'll move on to the next item. The inclusionary requirements for rental housing. I think that the way that I want to approach my answer is that it kind of goes back to an earlier comment I made about public and private collaboration and how those of us in the public sector or even in government have to be at the table to provide incentives to those who are making the financial investments and bearing the financial burdens. So I think it would be, I'm just going to recommend that the city make time to sit down with landowners and investors. Commissioner Wiscombe brought up one of the model projects that I had on my list as well. The Carrillo Commuter Lot project is a wonderful example of how that relationship has developed into an, as she said, model project for our community, and I think we need to encourage more of those. And I also am aware that the Housing Authority have their own constraints on what they're able to do, so we really need to take the initiative to reach out with the private sector and jumpstart workforce housing development, and have, I'm just kind of putting this out there, to have some sort of diverse working group with both community professionals and city appointees to look at neighborhood development standards and actually provide a more nuanced development standard neighborhood by neighborhood and create applicable flexibility and unique opportunities to each of those communities and each of those neighborhoods that would make it more neighborhood compatible. Because as we all know, when we have that overarching kind of umbrella state standards, it doesn't work in every community. Our neighborhoods here in Santa Barbara are so different from one another that I think it gets us into trouble. So we really need to start looking at providing that that detailed, nuanced development standard, neighborhood by neighborhood. And then for the final question, density program, I wanted to ask another question. Has staff had the opportunity to look through the recent housing-related laws that the governor had passed, and how much of those influence the direction that you might be going at this time in the next round of this effort?
Chair Bonderson, I think the recent amendment to state density bonus law actually does have fairly significant effect. I mean, changing our density bonus program to allow moderate income unit was one of the main things we were looking at, and so that's now something that's allowed. But it's only allowed if you're maximizing under state bonus density. So I still think there's the ability for the city to create its own program that could have impacts and benefit the city.
And would that fit into here, or would it be its own program?
It would be its own program. It would be our density bonus law, which refers to our affordable housing policies and procedures. So it's in our ordinance, but then the policies and procedures are what really go into the details about what's appropriate.
And would that require another, like a new fresh start, a new project, a new, like more staff resources for you to be able to handle that workload?
Chair Bonderson, yes, I mean, honestly, it probably would. It's something that's on our work plan. The housing element has policies for us to look at affordable housing, so it's definitely something that is on the plan for future. But as to the timing, that I don't have details on at this point.
That's okay. I just wanted to know what it would entail for you. And if you could name that future possible project, just off the top of your head right now, how would you define that in relationship to the Senate bills?
I would, Chair Bonderson, I would call it an update to the city's density bonus program.
Thank you. I'm going to refer to that later on, and that's why I asked you, so I know how to make it an easy, quick connection. So to conclude, I would just say that both Commissioner Boss's comments, I don't want to read them all into record again, but I had very similar comments, as well as Commissioner Bauke, Vice Chair Bauke, excuse me. I'm very curious on asking you directly a question. If you were able to lead the way right now by dividing up the programs, you said that you believe that it should be 2 separate programs. Not saying we're going to do that. I just wanted a moment to understand, how would you divide them up and what would they be? Maybe they become chapters, or maybe they become separate thoughts.
There's basically 2 approaches. One would be to add language and amend the priority housing designation with the appropriate regulations that would allow what we're trying to accomplish. The other would be actually another overlay that would accomplish basically very, very targeted at affordable housing. And if you're doing those things in that meet our objectives, here are the additional bonuses and additional density, or even basically just leave it in an FAR type product. I mean, I'm not going to answer that question, but those are the kinds of things that can be done. But, that would be a whole conversation and a lot of discussion among the commission and the council and the community.
Thank you. And because I didn't want to take words out of his mouth, I just wanted to say that I'm in agreement with that, and it may look like another conversation. I don't know if it's worth forwarding or considering, but I do personally like this approach. And I'll just wrap up by saying, again, we need to redefine the workforce housing definition, especially because there's so many different individuals that could fall into that. I've seen throughout public comment, it's not just people like teachers or people who work in the school system or the healthcare workers, the service workers that we tend to lean on this conversation towards, but even college students or people who work at UCSB, for example, which I know they fall into the school system, but we're talking about faculty, we're talking about parking enforcement on campus, we're talking about people who aren't necessarily school educators, but other types of workers. And I think we need to broaden and really emphasize the definition by looking at salary or hourly rates, annual income, not just titles. So if you are working in this direction, I urge you to look at it from a numerical point of view. And then again, just to ditto the idea of redefining the term community benefit so that we can really be able to use it appropriately. I see another request for Commissioner DeLuccio. Please go right ahead.
I find the conversation very interesting. So you're touching on the state bonus density laws, right? So that's almost going into the next section, isn't it?
Are you scolding us?
No, I'm just, isn't that going to the next questions?
Yes and no. There's a little bit of an overlap.
There's an overlap there, isn't there?
Yeah, we tend to, everyone tends to crisscross.
Because already, I mean, that's an interesting approach. How are we going to incorporate it into the zoning? And that's a whole discussion as part of the housing element. And already what's happening is, because as things have come before us, they've double dipped already. I mean, we have a lot of AUD projects that have come before us. They started with the AUD, and then they went deeper to get more units. They touched into the state bonus density.
Oh, yeah.
So we've had a lot of that come before us. So I guess, is that what we need to accomplish going forward once the housing element gets adopted in order to incorporate it all into the zoning ordinance? Or can they continue to just pick from a menu approach?
Commissioner DeLuccio, through the chair, they can continue to have this menu approach. The state density bonus law is always going to be on top of whatever we have established.
Okay.
We should just name it like menu à la carte, make it sound really appetizing. We are at a 3:15 timeline. I would like to encourage just a very, very brief stand up and stretch your legs break here. Can we take just around 7 minutes and return at 3:20, please? Welcome back, everyone. Our mini recess is over. It is 3:20, and I will welcome Ms. DeBusk when you are ready to introduce the final slide.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. So our last chapter is about the process, and so I'll read the questions. Number 10, what permitting process reforms from planning approvals to final building permit should be considered to streamline and increase regulatory certainty for housing projects? Number 11, should the Planning Commission's review include a discretionary action in place of non-binding preliminary review, replacing design review as the primary approval body on AUD projects that meet certain thresholds? So just to put that into maybe simpler terms, currently the Planning Commission has a required concept review for certain AUD projects, and design review makes the final decision. So the question is really, should Planning Commission have a land use approval for those projects? And number 12, should noticing requirements be revised to account for new tools and technologies for project visualizations without the need for story pole installation?
Thank you, Ms. DeBusk. So I'll encourage you all to turn on your lights, and we'll begin with Vice Chair Bauke, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Beat you to the punch. As to these questions, basically, I think I came to the conclusion that I could almost repeat John Campanella's list of recommendations verbatim. I'm not sure if you need me to do that. For the record, that every single one of the comments he has in, you want me to read? Okay. I'll put them in the record. As to the permitting process, finalize the objective development design standards, the ODS. I'm not sure where we are in the process. Could you give us an update as to when those will be back? I'm on the committee, and we got a note that it was continued because they're working on other more important items, and I understand with that. You only have so much staff, so could you update that?
Chair Bonderson and Commissioner Bauke, it looks like fall of next year is our goal for that.
Okay, thank you. So, number 2, standardized products for smaller lots, similar to the AUD previously approved plans. And, some cities have done that with these kind of things, and I think that would be a good investment, honestly, to provide good examples and guidance. And you may sort of do that with what you already have uploaded onto your map that you discussed, but something to that effect might be very helpful. Number 3, utilize HEU programs or other permitting process reforms, and anything we can do on the reform basis to basically improve the process would be helpful. I mean, shortening the time frames, clarity, basically any ambiguity always causes concern to the development community, and trying to remove as much of that would be very helpful. As to the Planning Commission's discretionary actions, his comment is, number 1, discretionary actions might not be needed if the project is AUD and ODS compliant, which I think it's a good point. If we meet both those standards, you still have design review, but clarity is in the ODS program, and that would be very helpful of getting those ambiguities to go away. Number 2, design is community concern. Design board should have approval rights if project is not compliant to the AUD and ODS, and that's, basically that's the function. If you're not coming in with something that's compliant, especially the ODS, basically that's the whole default mechanism. If you don't want to follow the ODS standards, you shall go through a more elaborate process. They can make that choice. As to number 12 of your question, his comment is new technologies for project visualization and make visualization available online with architectural drawings, and do not require story poles, and I'll add my personal, do not require story poles unless there is a need and desire as identified by the design review board. I think there will be circumstances in which story poles still might be needed, primarily in areas in which there might be high controversy. But having the visualization models available, just like you do the architectural drawings, online and to the public would be very helpful. And that's it for my comments and review of the questions, because he basically answered them all on here, and I didn't have any different comments.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Bauke, for reading, I'm going to say former Commissioner Campanella's comments into record. Next, we have Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree in principle with most of former Commissioner Campanella's comments, and I appreciate them being read into the record. I'm thinking in the first one, what permitting process reforms from planning approvals to final building permits should be considered to streamline and increase regulatory certainty for housing projects? I think eliminating the mandatory PC concept review and make it at the applicant's discretion is a good one. A lot of applicants like to have that concept review and opt for it and pay for it, but I think making it mandatory for the larger projects is not necessary. And just as a quote, on page 61 of the document, one of the most disliked aspects is the permitting process, was one of the quotes, and I think that's true. I don't know, Ms. Kokinda, you would answer this, is there an opportunity on some projects to combine project design approval and final approval?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson, through you to Commissioner Wiscombe. Yes, so it's really at the discretion of the applicants and how prepared they are. Generally, it's all about the level of detail they provide. So a lot of applicants specifically go and develop drawings and get their completeness determination just for project design approval. But if there's a lot of positive comments and they're not really worried, if they have all the details, tend to be smaller projects, not the larger projects, then we can schedule project design approval and final approval on the same day at the same hearing. So ways that we try to push projects along is if a board or commission isn't ready to grant final approval, they want to see a little bit extra, we ask, can you move it to consent? So it's not a full board hearing that the consent reviewers can review. And at least for ABR, consent meets on a weekly basis. For HLC, consent happens every 2 weeks with the full commission hearing. So
Okay.
there's different, but yes, it's possible, and we would like to encourage that as much as possible. But
Okay,
it's
thank you for that answer. Yeah, I kind of thought that these two could go hand in hand probably more often than they do. So that would be another comment. And then going on to the building department, divisions in the building department. Really, when the drawings go to the building department, they should be of a caliber that allows the review of the various divisions of the building department to handle that. And I think they should get one bite at the apple, unless it's a rare case. Mr. Buska's raising her eyebrows. I've been through the multiple bites at the apple, so. And I know this has come up a lot. With multiple reviews, conflicting information can result because the same person in the building division, in that division, is not reviewing the drawings as the person that did before. So I think there can be a lot of conflict there, so we have to be very careful. And if you're going to have, more than one bite at the apple, and I'm talking about the revisions and the comments made where changes have to be made to get your building permit, because then it has to go back and make sure that the checklist, it's been done and it's all done. But I'm always disturbed by the conflicting information. I went to one division of the building department and they said this, and then when I went back, I got a different answer. So I think it's important. So, and I'm going to say the same planner should be assigned through the entire process. I think that's important. Projects with substantially more affordable housing should have a discount in the permit fees and also have expedited permits. I think that would be something to implement that would help this along. Should the PC's review include a discretionary action in place of non-binding preliminary review and replace design review as the, no. I think mandatory non-binding preliminary review, and I said it before, on certain projects should be eliminated in favor of non-binding preliminary review at applicant's discretion when the applicant is required to return to the PC for a binding approval. So does that make sense? Yeah, so if you have,
Sorry, Commissioner Wiscombe, if I could clarify, does that mean you think Planning Commission should make a land use decision for AUD projects?
no.
Okay.
No, I'm saying that it's at the applicant's discretion, the non-binding preliminary review is at the applicant's discretion when the applicant is required to return to the PC for a binding approval, which in some cases they are, but not all, right? Am I-
If I can jump in, I was going to actually ask what the definition of the non-binding part was. Is that the concept review?
Chair Bonderson, yes, that's the concept review.
And
There are certain projects that may need to come to Planning Commission for some reason, but it's very few. We honestly, if they had a condominium, perhaps, but generally, they don't need a Planning Commission decision. And the commission may remember that about a year and a half ago, maybe longer, one of the concepts we brought forward was having a land use decision for these projects, for projects that may be of a certain size, right, on a certain size lot. It might be the same trigger as the concept review. And there was, at that time, there was support for that generally. And I think part of it was to facilitate housing, actually, to encourage it, because sometimes design review was, maybe not as supportive of the density, not as comfortable with it. So that was the direction back then, but I do think things have changed, so the direction may not be the same now, which is why we're asking the question.
And can I just ask, what year was that? Do you recall? Or generally speaking?
I think it may have been around June 2022, but I could be wrong.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may add some context to this question as well. So, of course, AUD projects really, there's a range of sizes. And the smaller ones clearly go a lot easier through ABR and HLC in the design review process. But this question might, think about some of the larger projects or some of the thresholds where members of the public are coming to ABR and HLC and they're talking about parking, they're talking about land use issues, they're talking about, they might be concerned about neighborhood compatibility and size and height. So a lot of the things that, again, in order to increase density or, you might have a bigger development overall and kind of be in the arena where it's more of a planning commission conversation. So we have to tell ABR and HLC members that they really need to just stay focused on the design and the aesthetics. So having a forum or a decision, a land use decision at the Planning Commission can kind of set the tone for when the project has to go through the actual design review approval process. So that's kind of a consideration in how we think about how we see certain projects move through.
Well, okay, because I'm getting a little bit confused about how the question is worded then, because for getting the concept review, it goes through a certain portion of design review and then gets forwarded to the Planning Commission for the land use portion, and then it goes back to the design review board for approval, design approval, right? Final project approval, or whatever the term is.
Do you want to hop on? So that's for the concept review at Planning Commission only happens for certain projects of a certain size.
They have to be a certain size.
That's correct.
Yes, no, I get that.
And so, yes,
And I'm
the
saying
design review,
eliminate.
there's a design review concept at either ABR or HLC, and then if it meets those size thresholds for the AUD project, then it comes to you all for the non-binding mandatory concept review, and then it would go back to the design review boards for project design approval and final approval. So it's a lot of process.
It's a lot of process, and I'm totally confused, because I'm trying to just tell you that I don't, the concept review, I think, should be at the discretion of the applicant and the risk that they take. But I'm also going to make a comment here that design review is essential to the quality of the projects in our city. I don't have any doubt about that. But the two bodies, the design review and PC, need to work in tandem. So we need to stay in our respective lanes and you know, do what we need, what our jobs are. We're not up here to say, you know, you need to articulate the building more or whatever. We're here for land use issues, and design review's not there for parking or whatever. So I don't know how we accomplish that, but we need to have the process be smooth. And I think I'm going to make another comment. Projects sometimes are forwarded to the Planning Commission too early in the process with a laundry list of to-dos from design review. And I think it facilitates our moving out of our lane when that happens. So I would prefer that the design review boards forward projects to the PC that are well vetted. You know, perhaps when they're 80 to 90% ready, and most of the design review comments have been addressed. And I just think it helps us stay in our lane and them stay in their lane. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Okay. And then, should noticing requirements be revised to account for new technologies without the need for story poles? Yes. I'm of the belief that in almost every case, story poles should be eliminated. Perhaps we go back to the size of now I'm kind of reversing myself a little bit, but perhaps we go back to the size of a project, and if it's large enough, that the design review board can require them. But I just think that they're extremely expensive, and that project visualizations have particularly at the pedestrian level walkthroughs, have become so good that we can do that. But that being said, noticing if we're going to reduce the need for story poles, noticing needs to be clearly conveyed to the public with specific links to the visualizations well in advance of the project coming. And visualization should be available in the online materials in an acceptable time frame prior to the meeting, so that the public has an opportunity to comment on a walkthrough. So that's, I think that's my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Next, we have Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll work backwards. So number 12, I'll say yes. Number 11, I'll cautiously say yes, and cautiously because there's the part of the question that says projects that meet certain thresholds. So without having that specifically defined, I'm cautiously yes. For number 10, a few thoughts, and mainly based on the comments that are in the progress report. So we heard that the permitting process is one of the most disliked aspects. It takes too long, there's too many steps, there's conflicting information. But they appreciated the early comments from their preliminary review process. They said they were really valuable and resulted in beautiful buildings that fit into the community. So I'm not sure what to do with that because we even saw that they said it took too long. And when asked how long should the process take, they generally described the actual median duration for AUD projects as satisfactory. So they suggested what was already happening. So I'm not sure if the disconnect is just people who are too far removed from the process that they went through, or if there were, if those were voices of people who hadn't actually been through the process, who just had perception of it taking too long or having too much conflicting information. So I'm not quite sure what to do, how to reconcile that. But one thing that I can note, I think for certain that came through in a few comments was that permit fees should be lowered for AUD projects. I'll add in the affordable housing AUD projects to encourage them and provide for lower cost housing. So that's part of incentivizing the process. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Boss. Next, we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
Thank you. As far as the cost go, yes, streamlining and the cost should be, I mean, we talk about want the cost to be less. However, that has to do with streamlining because the cost is built into the cost of providing the service, correct? So that's the only way we can do that is by streamlining. It's, your costs are not just taken out of a hat, they're based on your time of service. So as far as working backwards, which is really easy, I think the story poles should be a last resort. I know the project we just had before us down on the Funk Zone, I was told it cost $40,000 to put those story poles up. And when we went on a site visit, we didn't even fixate on those story poles. So I'm just wondering the back end, what use are they providing? I'd be interested to know from staff what input, what's coming out of those story poles. Is any useful information generally coming out of them? Not that we necessarily saying do away with them permanently, but they shouldn't be such a priority given to the story poles. And I know that in the old days, I was on the planning commission for a long time, we used to have these models in front of us that we used to look at during the meeting. I don't know if you guys did here. But now there's these three-dimensional models that can be viewed. So besides the drawings, the architectural drawings, there should be something else in place. It could be a three-dimensional model, for example, or I know when you look at houses these days, the real estate, you can go online and you can see in motion all the rooms and everything. So something like that, maybe we need to focus on more. As far as, I was also, as Commissioner Boss, certain thresholds for number 11, I'll just talk about 10 and 11 real briefly together. I only think that, I know that right now, I believe, isn't it like 15,000 square feet or more have to come before the Planning Commission as a conceptual review on the conceptual, but I don't see the merit of it coming before us even at any point unless down the road it does have some planning implications that before us. That I know that right now within certain, we can give height exceptions, for example. That'd be a reason why it would come before us. I think there needs to be reasons why that's going to come before us at some point if we're going to even to back up. I understand there's discretion perhaps to some of the applicants, they want to come before the Planning Commission for conceptual review. And now I see one useful thing there is because then then you're saying that if it's only before design review boards, even though there's land use questions come up. So, and then at those meetings, I know I was watching HLC yesterday, 1929 State Street, some letters that come in, and those are land use related, and they could not be addressed because that's not their role, land use. So how are those addressed if it's, and I feel like something's missing here. How are they going to be addressed if it's not coming before some land use, some board or staff address them? Is it some separate meeting to address them?
Yes, Chair Bonderson, through you to Commissioner DeLuccio. So our staff does a thorough review. It's part of our application completeness review when a development project is submitted. And so we confirm that all the zoning regulations are met, all the, that all the site requirements are met, transportation, it's routed to our different land development team reviewers through the city. But if it's just a design review decision and there's no land use decision approval component, or there's no mandatory concept review, then it's really just a decision of our design review boards based on our city charter. So we have ABR and HLC often fielding questions, and we have the chairs of each of those boards helping to manage that, as well as city staff who are trying to, again, try to keep design review board members in their lane by not, expanding their purview and talking about things that they really have no decision-making power over because it's a municipal code or we've already, determined that it's been established. And it also means that there's really, for members of the public, we have to educate them and communicate that that's not part of the board's purview. If there is a land use approval, or if we know that a project is going to go to the Planning Commission for a concept review, then we can share and say, please make sure that you're tracking this project. It will be, we can say that it's going to be scheduled for PC or the staff hearing officer. So we're able to give them an avenue in which to be able to voice comments, but oftentimes their comments have to, there's really nowhere to go with them because of just the situation and the approval process.
So that's something to bear in mind then. How do we vet that? If there are land use issues, which really is land use issues, but this really doesn't apply to a project, for example, if there's no discretionary, it's not going to come from the Planning Commission. We don't need to answer it here and now. This maybe is a whole separate subject. But how are the people's residents' land use issues addressed? And just so they're addressed. I mean, they're not going to go anywhere. It's not part of the project, and they are addressed. But the public doesn't feel like it's being addressed, is what I'm getting at. So maybe it goes back to, and I always said this in this city. You spend a lot of time on design, which is wonderful, and it shows in the projects, but there's no initial meeting, neighborhood-type meeting, a mandatory type of neighborhood meeting, and maybe that's the place. Maybe the meeting's not in the beginning of the project, but at some point within the project, maybe there needs to be a neighborhood meeting where all these comments are collected and they're addressed in a public forum. If they're land use related, and there's no other place where they're going to go, just so the public feels like they're heard and they're addressed. So I know I'm digressing a little bit, but just seeing these numbers, and I feel like we need to streamline. I don't feel like everything should be coming, before us unless it has to, or bodies, and we should focus on design when we need to. But again, I feel like then there's something missing here.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. Next, we have Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On number 10, something that's occurred to me has resulted in a question for staff. Ms. DeBusk, from a year and a half ago, I recall there were a lot of vacancies in the building department. Is that still true?
Chair Bonderson and Commissioner Lodge, it's not as bad as it was a year and a half ago. They have filled some of the positions, but they still have vacancies. They are just positions that are hard to find qualified applicants that, are able to live in the city or, commute here. So it affects everybody.
Okay, well, that right there must slow down the process if you don't have the adequate staff. So I'm sure you're working on that. And keeping projects with the same staff person throughout. I think that's probably the policy that's been with the city for some time. But that should be continued. On number 11, my experience has been when I was the one that was the liaison to all 3 design review boards, was they get like deer in the headlights when they have to consider land use issues. They don't want to do it. And I always thought that when this distinction was made on the larger projects, that they would come before discretionary action to the Planning Commission. I was kind of concerned when it became just concept review. I think that the Planning Commission should definitely be the primary approval body on AUD projects that meet certain thresholds. I think we'd make the design review bodies happier. They could just stick to their trade and the design aspects. Yes, on number 12, the no, not allowing any presentations that are at bird's eye view. As we have seen, flybys, you can't really tell what the buildings, what its impact is on the surrounding development. Just from at grade viewpoint. Cost of story poles has been mentioned, but given, like $40,000 on one of the last projects we saw for the story poles, how costly it is, but considering the total cost of the project, it's minimal. So I think that, as Vice Chair Balke said, on certain big projects, really, where it's not that easy to see, even with all these new tech tools and technologies for project visualizations, it's not really that easy to see what the impact would be, should still be required. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. I'm going to take my turn next, but I always encourage everyone to turn their lights back on if you have an outstanding thought or question or comment, so we can always revisit anyone who may like to speak again. So I'm going to start, as always, with the next question, number 10. What permitting process reforms should be considered? So first, I think that staff has, and I believe it's in the staff report, to identify the single greatest applicant complaint. And if it's not defined in that way, maybe it's defined in a different way, there's maybe a number of complaints, but across all types of housing applications, when we can understand where those shortcomings are taking place, then we can address the issue to improve the process based on real examples. And I'm not going to ask you what they are today. I'm sure you have that data. But I do agree that we need to improve the permitting process to help reduce the amount of staff interpretation. And that goes back to continuity on a project. We all know that continuity on a project is essential, but the staffing issues that we're all aware of, and Commissioner Lodge brought up vacancies, current vacancies, that directly impacts the ability for continuity, as we all can imagine. The last time I checked, which was just about 3 weeks ago, the Community Development organizational chart described 9 vacancies, and since then, Ms. Bjork has put in her resignation, and of course, we know that some positions, including Ms. DeBusk, people are moving around. But that translates to me into more vacancies, not less. So 9 was the last number. I believe it's either 10 or more now. And I think that makes a significant impact when you are short-staffed. And in fact, I wrote down something you said earlier, Ms. DeBusk, that the soonest you believe, estimating here on the spot, that you may be able to finalize the objective development design standard wouldn't even be projected until potentially a year from now, fall 2024. All of that to me seems like an excessive burden, that it's hard on the community, it's hard on each of us in the roles who are trying to determine and assist projects and approve projects and guide projects such as the design review boards and so on. We can't do our job to the best of our ability when you guys, staff, can't do your job to the best of your ability because you're overworked and overstaffed. And to me, that's a significant part of this problem for number 10. So what can we do, at least in this conversation, to find solutions to that? Well, That again goes back to resources, and that's not in the purview of the Planning Commission. However, I do know that as council follows Planning Commission hearings, and they are the ones who can put their 2 cents on this, that allocating funds would go to them. And I think that we need to think about that, possibly talk about that again. But when we do have staff interpretation, unfortunately, when that happens, it tends to move that goalpost over and over again. And by stabilizing the process, it allows us to create a full, complete set of comprehensive review guidelines that staff can follow, that applicants can use. And maybe the introduction, if it doesn't exist already, of a customized checklist. And I say customized because each project is so different. So looking at the plan set guidelines or the application guidelines for different types of applications may not be applicable to every type of project, and that's where that customization comes in, either prior to initial submittal or as part of staff's review of the initial submittal, working on deeming the project as complete. If we do have some type of checklist style that can be used, it may be, I might be calling it a checklist, but you may be calling it your letter when you review the items needed for that type of project and returning it to the applicant. But one of the things I think we need to do to help prevent significant staff direction changing later in the process is to make sure, and I think you already do this, but I think we need to improve it, is to make sure that everyone who can chime in to the review of the project, even if it's the last step of the project, needs to chime in up front. As a practitioner myself, I recognize when I get plan check corrections back from the building department, they actually have sections where they go back and they check with zoning. They go to public works and maybe there says no comment. I think that if we're not doing that yet, which I don't believe we are, correct me if I'm wrong, it needs to happen at the very initial step. The very first time a project comes in for review. And it often comes in at zoning, not always. But if it does, I think it needs to be added to that initial zoning review where they, and you might not know all the answers. You may not know who we need to go to yet because the project may not be clearly defined yet. So believe me when I say I understand. I used to be a staff member in a different agency, so I understand what you're looking at from your perspective. And from a practitioner looking in from the outside, it's a really big challenge to find that happy medium where everyone benefits and everyone works together. But that's something that I have identified is if we can clearly get a big picture overview right up front, as hard as that may be, it may reduce the comments that come in later where we say, well, why didn't we know that sooner? It changes everything. And that happens a lot, even on tiny projects that I may have. They're not this type of multi-unit housing kind of projects, but I get that in my work where we're like, well, we should have known that sooner, or why didn't we know that, or why didn't somebody identify that when we came up through the initial stages of the project. And again, you know, this is not a criticism in the sense that it's, you know, it happens. But how do we prevent that, or how do we improve that from happening in the future? And I wanted to say, the City of Ventura brings all relative department representatives together in a single application hearing to assure alignment of application review to facilitate, and I'm going to quote, consistency and stability between departments. So our city has a little bit more of a circular, slightly disconnected communication, at least from the observation and the comments that we see in the staff report from the public. And that disconnected communication between employees tends to create conflicted responses to applicants that I think we really need to address. And that, by addressing that, solving that, figuring out where we can improve that, it's going to be a big part of that streamlining and that increase of regulatory certainty for housing projects. I think it will also help prevent errors or misdirection, which, you know, is just a small little detail of the problem, because by doing that, it's going to reduce misunderstanding throughout the process between departments and also with the applicant receiving information. And I just wanted to mention, Commissioner Wiscombe kind of touched on this, the one bite of the apple. You know, even with projects that are really on the scale, simpler projects, it's very, very rare to have the one bite, the one plan check. We expect plan check. I speak on behalf of practitioners. We expect plan check, but when the plan check brings up things that we thought we'd cleared, that's when that frustration comes in. And if we think we've cleared it, it shouldn't be a surprise later on in the process. So I'm hoping we can solve that by having this conversation here today. The other piece of that puzzle, which I think would solve some of the problem, but I'm not sure how we could do that, is where in the process can we lock in the current regulation? So can we lock in, like if I submit today, whatever the rules are today gets locked into the duration of this project? Well, I see your heads nodding no. So it becomes this speed game of how do we get to the next level so that we can get the best, let's say, code application, or before the end of the year, the best outcome for the project, because we're always, as practitioners, I tell you, we are always in fear of the code changing. If we don't get it in by the end of the year, I don't know if you all know this, I noticed this when I was in an agency, and I noticed this as a practitioner, the last quarter of the year, from October to December, all of a sudden everyone is extremely busy because guess what? We're all racing to get the project in before the clock strikes the new year. And it's very frustrating for you as staff, I know, I've been there, and it's even this may be harder on us as practitioners trying to handle multiple projects trying to come in to beat some type of invisible code change, or something's going to happen. The Senate bills, for example, they get applied, or something's been adopted and it's going to go into action. So there's this invisible pressure on the applicants, on the property owners. I'm sure you know, but I don't know if everyone realizes. And so if we could lock in, if that's even possible, if it's fair, that when we submit a project at a certain date, that we understand what the codes and the ordinances and the rules and the expectations are, it will significantly decrease that lack of predictability, which is really the biggest problem that housing projects face today, is that lack of predictability, that lack of certainty, and you see a lot of projects fall out of the system because of it. How do we help them? That's one suggestion. These are just suggestions here today. Of course, fees. We've heard other planning commissioners talk about fees. There should be a fee waiver or a fee reduction, expedited permits. When a project provides a certain amount of affordability beyond the requirement, we need to encourage that and incentivize that to increase affordable housing. And the bottom line is that when a developer introduces affordable housing in their project, the cost has to be made up elsewhere, and often it's made up by increasing the cost of the rental units or the selling the unit at market rates. And this does not help the community. I mentioned it before. It only supports financing and realizing the project to get built, which is what we all want. We want the projects to be realized, but this isn't the right way to do it. There has to be some form of financial incentive to allow the final product to serve the community the way it needs to serve the community at the rates that it needs to be fair. And we need to truly incentivize affordable housing so the projects really pencil out. I hate that term, but it's true. And not at a cost that where the other units are the ones carrying the burden, or at a loss to the developers. Otherwise, these projects just aren't going to happen, and we all want that. That's why we're spending this time together. So again, one way of doing that would be reducing costs of the application process. I'm sorry, this particular slide, I'm very passionate about this because I do this on a daily basis, so please forgive me. I guess I'm the winner today of the wordiest discussion, but I'll jump into number 11. Good news is on number 12, my answer's really short. But on number 12, from my understanding, and I understand Ms. DeBus confirmed this question has been presented to the PC before. And in the past, it seems that previous commissioners tended to agree that, in fact, the PC should become the primary approval body, and I strongly support that as well, that a discretionary process change so that the PC takes this on should be the case. I think we should be looking at land use, and we should be assisting design boards by taking that burden off of their shoulders and becoming the primary approval body, especially when it comes to the most complex multi-unit housing projects. I think they need to come to us so that there's consistency throughout the project. And that goes back to concept review that Commissioner Wiscombe brought up. If we are considering the removal of that as a mandatory, or giving them the option of coming, in any case, no matter what, I think that we need to be the final approval as well, so there's consistency from the beginning to the end. And I do actually, on a personal level, like the concept review, although we all are aware that commissioners change often in the course of a few years when a project goes through the process. These are very long processes. And so continuing to depend on robust, comprehensive staff reports that bring in history, possibly even asking newer planning commissioners, I mean, this isn't obvious, but having the newer planning commissioners take the time to watch the hearings and read the remarks, and they may not agree with them, that's fine, but to really understand the history, I think that that's really vital to that continuity, just as it would be if a staff member retires and a new staff member is assigned to the project. When we make a significant effort, then everyone benefits. So I also want to just add that the expectation and responsibility of applicants who come to the Planning Commission should also be redefined. That's a little bit of a delicate topic to say out loud, but I think applicants need to have a more correct and fair understanding of what we expect of them when they show up to a hearing, and not expect that it's just a walk in the park, that they're going to get an approval and walk out and everyone will be happy. I know that we often get dismayed responses when we ask for a continuance and we send an applicant back to return with more information, but that shouldn't be frowned upon. An applicant should appreciate that, because we're not denying a project, we're making sure that it's been vetted properly, and that as a result of that, you know, the expected outcome is improved, and it's improved for, when it goes back to staff, it's improved throughout the process. Okay, so guess what? The last answer is really easy. My answer is yes. I definitely support these amazing, beautiful renderings that we've seen a lot of this year. I encourage applicants to come in with those as much as possible. If they aren't being used early enough in the process in design review, maybe that's where we can make some changes. I think it was Commissioner Lodge, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'd like to give credit where credit is due, encourage those fly-throughs, not to be flying at a bird's eye view, but a human view, is that right? That helps us, because instead of walking around the property looking at story poles and trying to imagine mass, we're looking right through it and seeing the sky and other things behind it. If we could see it as a mass in a video at a human level, as if we were walking around it, I'm telling you, it really makes a significant difference, and we can save a lot of cost for those applicants by removing the obligation to put up those expensive story poles. So, and I just want to mention, unless the design board identifies a reason, I do think we need to defer back to them. They are the ones we trust for design. So unless the renderings aren't accomplishing what they need, then they would ask for a story pole. And that concludes my responses. I don't see any lights on, so as I made you a commissioner, Ms. DeBusk. As Commissioner DeBusk, you've been promoted. I don't think you want that job. Demoted. Oh, boy. Okay, we can all have a little light laughter, and we're going to move on to our grand finale. We're going to conclude here. Before I ask each commissioner to have a conclusion, I wanted to ask staff each, and by the way, I didn't have the opportunity to introduce our staff today. Ms. Falk is here, Ms. Kokenda, and Ms. Belts. Thank you for being here. We didn't hear from you very much. That's good for us. It means we're not in trouble. And thank you to Ms. DeBusk for, guiding us. Do you have any of you have anything you want to ask us to deliberate on? Any topic you might want any individual to go into any depth on?
Chair Bonderson, I think we asked a lot of you today,
Yeah.
and we've asked a lot of ourselves to do something with this information, so we might be scared to
Oh, boy.
respond with anything else.
We could go
but-
on for days, right?
No, I think, I feel like we've got a lot of, there's a lot of consensus among the group, and we're hearing a lot of direction, and we recognize that AUD, there are different components and other programs and toolkit items that we can use to look at housing, and we're already thinking about all of these things, so there's a lot of consistency. So I don't think at this time, unless Ms. DeBusk, you'd say anything else.
You
I think
concur?
that says it all.
Very good. Well, I didn't want to move on without checking in, and I do also want to check in really quickly with Ms. Johnson. Your job is probably the most complex here today. You're trying to record everything. How are you doing?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I was able to capture it, so
Okay.
I'm okay.
Well, you have a recording to lean on as well.
Thank you.
Very good. So we are going to go just commissioner by commissioner. Please turn on your lights if you'd like to speak, and we'll all have a turn before we conclude, and then we'll close this item. So Commissioner Wiscombe, please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a big shout out to staff. You guys did a remarkable job. This progress report is great, and I think the public recognized that too. We got, a lot of correspondence over the 2 meetings from the public about just the information that's included in this progress report. And I went through it once and then again before this meeting, and there is so much in here that you can take away. So thank you all very much, and your questions are very thoughtful. I think you got some consensus and maybe some, we disagree a little bit, but we're on the same track. But I think mostly we were kind of all on the same track, which is great. So thanks again to all of you, and to Ms. Ostringer too and Ms. Johnson, who I don't even want to think about your job here for these minutes. Do we want to take a poll on, should we do a poll on how many pages these minutes are going to be? Maybe we should have a little bet. I don't know.
Yeah, that's funny.
At any rate, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. I'm really glad we're taking this so lightly and having a little bit of laugh. These long, complex hearings are hard enough as they are. So thank you for the comedic relief. Next, we have Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm hoping that we can go back to what I first proposed, and I'd like to ask the Commission my colleagues, to support a request to ask staff, particularly the City Attorney's Office, to look into the possibility of creating an all-affordable housing requirement for the high priority area to get the kind of housing that we really need. I think a lot of people didn't understand what the goal of this whole thing was, that we went this direction with the AUD project and the program, and particularly the high priority level, overlay level, the high density level, because the development community told us if we did, we would get workforce affordable housing, what we need, and we haven't. And so I think we need to change direction, and so.
May I ask a question of you, Commissioner Lodge? And I took notes, I want to make sure I got it. When you say looking into making the priority housing overlay into all affordable housing, Do you mean that each project would include affordable housing, not that it would all
No.
be affordable housing?
No, it would be a 100% affordable housing overlay, which has been very successful in at least one other city.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Next, we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
Yeah, I want to thank staff. I actually came to this meeting today and said, why are we having another meeting on this? But this was really worthwhile, and you guys are great, let me just tell you. And I actually watched the city council meeting, was it on Tuesday? When you got the expiration date removed and made this program permanent, and I thought you did a great job, Ms. DeBas. And you had a great slide. I wish you would share it with us at some point. It was the housing toolbox slide. Do you guys agree, right? I mean, that was so outstanding. I'd love for you to maybe send a copy of that to all the commissioners. That was so helpful. That's our roadmap going forward, what we need to do when the housing elements is finally going to be adopted. And I do want to call out to the public that continues to send us letters and comprehensive letters. And I don't really know Commissioner Campanella, but man, I have to commend him. He's not on this commission. He probably was here for several years, but he still stays engaged, and that is it's wonderful. And I want to just do that call and say I really appreciate that, and I find his correspondence to be very helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. I share your sentiment about former Commissioner Campanella, and I'm so thankful that he continues to help participate and guide us with his comments. I think that's really amazing. I will move on now to Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll first respond to Commissioner Lodge, and I'd support exploring an affordable housing overlay as well, and I'm guessing that might spill into next week. But for this item today, I really want to commend staff as well. This was a great report. It was easy to digest, which we can't say for all of our reports of this length, so really appreciate that. And I especially love that it's grounded in data and facts. So you're looking at numbers, you're looking at percentages, length of time, and again, that's all data that we have. But you sprinkled in feedback from focus groups and from survey responses to, I think, helps with the narrative and helped move it along. So just a lot of gratitude for this report, and I wish all of our reports were this wonderful. And I'll also thank the public for being engaged in when this came to the commission in October and again today. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Vice Chair Balke, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for shortness of time, ditto to her comments. As I noted on the October 2nd meeting, this was the best report I've seen staff produce since I've been on the commission, and kudos to all the work. That was quite an effort, but it definitely gave us a lot of clarity and understanding of what the AUD program has accomplished and what it hasn't accomplished. And I don't know what I can say other than affordable housing is the biggest issue the city has. It's so wide-ranging. It's not just the physical affordable housing that people, it's now affecting our social fabric in lots of ways, you know, all the way to you can't get a vet appointment. Your medical appointment for a specialist doctor is 6 months out. I mean, we're getting to a point, it's clearly a problem, and we need to take this seriously and act on it. And that's the reason why I want to pound on the table about things like enhanced infrastructure finance districts as a way to get the capital to actually do something constructive and really, you know, move the needle on this issue. Also, you know, this program really did what it said it was going to do. It was going to create rental housing, which it has, but it didn't create affordable rental housing or affordable housing in any shape or form. So back to my point is we should move on from this program and really focus on either a separate program or change the city's density bonus program, or do what we can on the priority housing overlay to really focus, which, you know, one of the things Commissioner Lodge has is move towards that. So, you know, I could go through the points I made on October 12th, and I definitely stand by all those that were summarized in those minutes. I couldn't say them any louder. It's deed-restricted affordable housing that we need, may it be rental or may it be for sale, but we need to get our act together and really push the needle. We're never going to get to that 8,000 number. But we really have to be very serious about this. So thank you for all your time on this.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bauke, and I will be the last speaker. I don't see any lights on. You're always welcome to turn them on while I'm speaking if you wish. I'm going to do my very best not to repeat what other people have said, even though I agree with so much of what has been shared today. And I have to once again agree with Commissioner Wiscombe that we have ironically sounded very similar today. So you have quite a bit of consensus from this commission, even though we come from very different backgrounds. We are concerned about very different things. And it's nice to know that we are in similar agreement on a lot of points. Now, not all of them, but on a lot of them today. So for that reason, I'm not going to repeat, but I would like to touch on a few things. The first one is something I mentioned the last time, and I'm hoping that the first thing that we can address is a new name for this. And let's get away from AUD, which is tricky and it confuses people. I'm hoping it will be something to do with multi-unit housing. Next, I want to really emphasize how timing is of the essence. When we talk about streamlining comes down to timing. And really, that's the biggest problem that we are facing, is that we aren't realizing housing as quickly as we need. And I'm not saying hope, I'm saying need. We need it. We have to meet a numerical goal, and we can't get there. And this comes down to speed and timing. And I really want to highlight what we heard today. Fall 2024 may be the earliest we may be able to realize project development design standards. I heard this loud and clear. And this is not because of a lack of trying. It's not a lack of desire. It's because we don't have the staffing manpower needed. Secondly, I want to go back to the term that I asked Ms. DeBusk to define for this purpose: new project update to city density program. If that's something that we wish to see, again, it requires resources, staff, hours. We're all aware that finance and budgeting are not within the Planning Commission's purview. However, I am going to encourage you, Ms. DeBusk, to create a clear, I'm going to call it, list of obstacles to help council understand the full range of challenges that applicants face when bringing a housing project through the development process, from the initial submittal to final inspection and case completion. And I urge council to reallocate and prioritize staff resources. Community development needs a sufficient and realistic budget to make their department whole again. And in order to truly advance housing development in our community and to meet the state's RHNA numbers, the requirement that we are held accountable for in our community, I believe the only way to do that is to make sure that we have staff assigned and hours available, and therefore resources to pay for those staff hours. And so this has to come from the top down. And that's something that can only be allocated and prioritized by council. So I urge council to make a true good faith effort to fund community development properly and fully for success. The PC can't do this, staff can't do this, only council can reallocate and assign funds. So I'm hoping that council's listening. This is on council to help the effort truly succeed and to speed up the process to achieve that success. I'm hoping to in the future, see some sort of time dedicated to the topics that Commissioner Bauke, Vice Chair Bauke, excuse me, and Commissioner Lodge talked about today. And that's, I'm going to summarize it. Commissioner Bauke's thoughts were either to adjust priority housing overlay or amend the city's density bonus program, or create an overlay perhaps only for where we want to target affordable housing throughout the city. And I also want to mention Commissioner Lodge's idea is very interesting to me. However, I realize that it requires significant community input, developer input, and that goes back to those conversations that I think we need to have, bringing together the public and the private sectors, having government officials or staff at the table to really make an effort for partnerships for the public good. I think that's it. That's the most effective way that we can see what we need to achieve come to reality. So, as we all know, Planning Commission has the authority to make these recommendations and propose policy amendments to council, but ultimately effective policymaking that truly, truly will lead to multi-unit housing development falls on them. So a variety of policy tools and planning process improvements are available if the council would prioritize them and direct staff to implement them. So I hope that council can add this to their agenda as soon as possible and to truly make staff resources a top priority. This would serve the community in many, many ways and increase the longevity of the talented planners that we have in community development, not just planners, but staff in general, in all departments. Because if we all know that if you're overworked and you burn out, you may not be with us as long as we want you to be with us. And so if we can get some of those vacancies filled and task distributed more properly and fairly, then everyone will benefit, because we'll get the work done, we'll speed it up, and we'll keep your health protected as well, so we don't lose you. And with that, I will end by saying thank you for the efforts that you've all put out here today. This, again, as I will echo from my colleagues, has been one of the best staff reports, most complete, comprehensive data ever compiled into a single place that we've seen for at least in the most recent years. Thank you for that effort. I hope we can speed it up and have you back sooner than later. And if I do have one more comment. So before I close, I'll allow everyone to go around again. Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for staff. If there is a desire for consensus interest on the Planning Commission to look into the possibility of making the priority overlay, high-density overlay, 100% affordable, what would you need from us?
What would you need from the Planning Commission if that were to be considered? If the overlay, a new overlay would be discussed and considered, what would you need from Planning Commission?
Chair Bonderson, I don't know that we necessarily need anything. I mean, it is something we can look into. We can look at the Cambridge example. I do have a concern, though, because our housing element is based on those densities, and it doesn't identify them as being affordable. So if you can only get that density by being 100% affordable, I'm concerned that that's going to have ramifications with HCD, and that it's not something that would be acceptable to them. So that's something we're going to need to look into as well.
Okay, well, if you will inquire, I think that would be helpful, so that we know if it is something.
That won't slow you down for your submittal. Okay.
And Chair Bonderson and Commissioner Lodge, just background, I used to work for the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, in their community development department. So I know all the people who develop these policies, and they're dear old friends and colleagues. And so, generally, anytime we're looking at policies, we do a broad search. We usually start in the state of California, of course, because the land use laws here, but we're always looking to our friends, and Cambridge is always one of the most progressive, so.
Okay, well, I had a,
I would love to check in with them.
okay, well, Cassandra, I don't remember her last name, is the person I spoke to this morning, and we had a very nice conversation, so I'm glad to hear that.
Very good. And I don't see any more lights on, so I'm just going to end by asking Ms. DeBusk on behalf of planning staff, do you need anything else at this moment?
We are good. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I have none.
Okay, and I'm just going to encourage, we all know this already, but since this is going to be such a thick minutes, I would encourage every planning commissioner to pay close attention to your section, and if you have any comments or edits, please just share it ahead of time, and let's do our best to help support Ms. Johnson. This is a tricky one, and we want to help. So with that, I will conclude item number 3, and I will move quickly into our administrative agenda. I would like to begin by asking Commissioner Boss, do you have a staff hearing officer liaison report for us?
I'm embarrassed with Ms. Kokinda here, but have not yet watched. I will watch the November 1st meeting before next week.
It was riveting. Okay. Next, we have Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
I just wanted to report on the Harbor Commission, which I don't very often, at their October 19th meeting. They had a presentation on Brophy Brothers changing their retail space to a clam bar, which is Suite C, which is right next to Suite D, which is also a clam bar right now. So they want to combine the two and make a big clam bar and eliminate their retail space. Hold on, my notes here. The considerations are parking, ADA access, and the overall impact on the surrounding area, and a coastal development permit would be required. So they unanimously approved sending this request in the change of use to the Planning Commission. So at some point, we will see the Brophy Brothers proposal. Thank you.
That's so exciting. Thank you. And next, we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
Yeah, HLC, I'd like to bring things before us that will ultimately come before the Planning Commission. But I'm going to report, I know the chair may get into it more, on, they actually were talking about State Street interim operations, their participation. This goes back to the 1025 meeting. They discussed the commission's role, which is to review guidelines for outdoor business facilities. And they created the State Street Interim Working Group, including the chair, Grumbine, Commissioner, is it Ensberg? Ensberg, and Commissioner McCord. And the working group would work with staff. They would attend council meetings and report back to the HLC Commission on a regular basis. And the staff also clarified that currently the State Street Advisory Committee's role is in development of the long-term master plan for State Street. So they're making that distinction there, what the roles were. Then on the 11/8 meeting, that was yesterday, just to get caught up a little bit, two things happened there. One was that they actually gave a report on the state interim, I guess, City Council recently had their meeting for State Street interim operations on bike lane striping. And so Commissioner Ensberg, she appeared at the meeting regarding the striping, and the recommendation they made with Commissioner McCord, I guess in the full board, I guess the chair was involved with that too, Grumby, in that they agree with the striping that it should be in the center. It should be straight and consistent for the entire 8 blocks. The council, I guess, ultimately decided to make them linear, but off-center with white striping. So I think they were pretty much in agreement there, the HLC and the City Council. And also 1919 State Street was on the agenda. That's not going to come before us because the applicant received project design approval, and that was to convert, what's interesting here is 3 buildings, this is 1919 State Street, from office use to hotel use. And there were 7 letters of opposition. And what do you think all those letters had to say? It was land use related, but they were opposing the hotel use and instead advocating for housing. So that's my reports.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. And I don't see any other lights on, so I'll go next. I have a quick report from October 2nd, ABR. It's a new item, project design approval at 400.5 Old Coast Highway. Its proposal is to add 3 one-bedroom residential units to an existing 3-unit residential development under the AUD program and state density bonus law. 2 new units would be restricted to low-income households, and 1 would be restricted to moderate-income households. The project includes concessions regarding open yard, bicycle requirements, as well as lower parking ratios. Kind of exciting, considering what we just talked about. Next, I have a report from the Transportation and Circulation Committee that took place here, a meeting that took place on November, on November, how did I miss the date? On October 27th. And staff presented highlights of the draft Lower East Side Community Connectivity Active Transportation Plan, including recent community engagement efforts and proposed bicycle and pedestrian facilities within the plan. The TCC expressed support for the draft plan and stated that it may proceed to City Council for adoption. However, one committee member expressed non-support for the proposed pedestrian and bicycle overcrossing project within the plan due to estimated costs. Next steps are to finalize the plan and proceed to City Council early 2024 for plan adoption, and that includes requesting council support for pursuing further grant funding for proposed projects within the plan. And then lastly, if the city is successful in securing grant funding for a future pedestrian and bicycle overcrossing, the project would require Planning Commission approval for a coastal development permit. So if all goes well, you will see this project hopefully in the near future. There are also a few new websites that Planning Commission should check out, and they are, I believe they're on the TCC website. If they're not, I can forward this to Ms. Johnson to share. And these links will get you to our new interactive bike network maps, existing funded and proposed bike facility maps, bike education links, bicycle share network maps, and bike parking facilities. So there's lots of stuff going on. Last but not least, there's a lot here. You can also get a link to our the city's recently updated Vision Zero website and links to those capital projects. Sorry, I have one more. We're almost done. Just a very quick review of the most recent State Street Advisory Committee meeting. It's the one that Commissioner DeLuccio referenced. It was on October 23rd. Just correcting, it wasn't the 25th, it was the 23rd, but it's the same one. And what was discussed was the State Street Master Plan, transportation network, and mobility components. So we actually had the Transportation Department at that meeting. They had a lot to do with getting the information pulled together, shared with the consultant, and then MIG, the consultant, and city staff presented those recommendations of mobility design within the 20 to 24-foot emergency access right-of-way space along State Street, and how those mobility options would support the visions and place-making elements for each district. So if anyone's interested in that, please make the time to watch the video. The videos are always available. And the next meeting will be in December, which I will share with you once I get the date. There is a small chance they're going to have an interim meeting in November, but we're getting really close, so maybe it won't happen. And that concludes my portion. I don't see any lights on, so I will go ahead and say it's 4:39. That concludes our November 9th. I had to double check the date. Today's the 9th. Planning Commission hearing, and our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for next Thursday, November 16, 2023. So that's it. Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day.